Thank you all for coming. We had an unbelievably overwhelming turnout for this, more than we had anticipated. Let me begin by saying this is the Raleigh node of what is a global meetup of legal hackers at there's over 80 countries now that have chapters for legal hackers, and I think there are about 45 that are actually involved today. So this is part of a growing movement around the world, and it's just remarkable to see how it's grown from its inception, which was only in 2013. So it's been quite a thing. So this is the first CL+B festival that's computational law and blockchain, and I'm just delighted to be able to have Campbell's Legal Hacker Group host this year. Let me begin by saying, that's not working. What happened?
So what happens if you unmute it? That's it's not needed right now.
We'll get that in a second. But let me thank, first of all, Campbell Law School for hosting us and supporting us, and Google Fiber for giving us access to this beautiful space, and Lawyers Mutual, who's graciously provided the food for us today. And
there you go.
Uh-oh.
Maybe
you don't want a screen that pops up at this point that says introduction. Shift plus the key next to it.
You probably just X out. It should be fine. It works. It does that to me every time I plug a mouse into my computer. You should just do it.
All right. Well,
just X out.
That's getting set up. So I mean, what is legal hackers? Legal hackers started in 2013 at Brooklyn Law School. Professor Askew there was giving a class on legal technology, and it kind of grew organically out of his class. And you can see that it's grown enormously over the years, but it still has sort of foundational connections to that organization. We have our annual meeting there every year, and we just there you go. There you go. Thank you. So Campbell Law School Legal Hackers. There we go. That's me. You probably know that. This is important. This is the legal disclaimer. For some reason, whenever I speak, they want me to put a disclaimer on. Campbell has nothing to do with anything I might say. And critically, everything I might say could be wrong. That's one of the things it says. So here's all of our supporters. So thanks so much, NC Riot, Banjo, Petronella, Google Fiber, we've had a great outpouring of support from the community. NC State and one different state. I love this. I have to put it up here because I'm a philosopher. And this is one of my favorite builders. There's actually many versions of this. Sometimes it's cloud computing. There's a blockchain version. There's an AI version. But that's me. So what is Legal Hackers? So like I say, this is from the website. Legal Hackers is a global organization, grassroots. They always like to talk about it being bottom up. We have designers, entrepreneurs, students, teachers, technologists, and what we share is this: a desire to explore and develop creative solutions at the intersection of law and technology. I want to think about that today in particular. How it started was 2012. There was a class at the Brooklyn Law Incubator, and it started from that. But we've evolved. Professor asked it here, he is. The goal of legal hacking is to morph and evolve the law into, on the one hand, to better serve technologists, enterprises, and society, but also to harness technology so that lawyers can better service their clients. Okay, so that's the original goal, and I think it's evolving, frankly. Why? What's new? Partly the fact that this is actually one of the very first student chapters that's run by students, and with the goal also of reaching out more broadly to a university campus. Right? So we're really happy today to be working with the AI Club from NC State. We hope this is going to grow. So that's new, right? Putting an emphasis on students and on an educational experience for them. And what I think this gives us, this is one of my favorites. Anyone know David Foster Wallace, right? From his famous "This is water" speech. You know, the two fishes are swimming along, and this one says, how's the water? And they say, what the hell is water, right? And this is the problem I think that we often face when we're dealing with these kinds of things. We're so immersed in the things that we're doing. We know the details of practice. We know we need to serve our clients. We know we want to make money doing this, right? And so we can lose the bigger picture very easily. And part of what I think we can do, especially with student groups, is to get us out of the fish tank and to think more broadly about what we're doing, to think about how it actually works. And I want to make this point. This is, anyone know BlackRock? BlackRock is probably one of the world's largest, if not the largest, financial investment companies, right? And this is from a famous letter that Larry Fink, the founder and CEO, wrote, more than a year ago now. Companies must ask themselves, what role do we play in the community? What role do we play in the community? How are we managing our impact on the environment? Are we working to create a diverse workforce? Are we adapting to technological change? Are we providing and retaining opportunities that our employees and businesses will need to adjust to an increasingly automated world? Are we using behavioral finance and other tools to prepare workers for retirement and to help them achieve their goals along the way? This wasn't just blowing smoke with Larry Fink. He actually set this as their investment policy at one of the world's largest financial firms, because he's quite aware that the long-term viability of the institutions that he wants to invest in depends upon them making a valid social contribution. So part of that means, I think, from our perspective, we have the opportunity to get out of the fish tank, to look more broadly at what we're doing, right? To get out of the silos and think about how the work that we're doing is impacting and being influenced by a variety of factors. And we have great, universities here in town that can help us do this. They're experts of all sorts, and we have some great people who are going to speak today. So getting out of the silos, I think, is the theme for today. And here's some of the pictures of this. Here's some of our speakers. I'm going to actually turn this over now to Maynard, who's going to introduce himself, and we need to switch up the slide.
Hello everyone, my name is Dave. I'm a research faculty at North Carolina State University, Department of Electrical Engineering and Physics Department. I'm coming from an interdisciplinary lab. Our lab is composed of electrical engineers, computer scientists, computer engineers, physicists, mathematicians, and we always try to come up with multidisciplinary approaches and solutions. There is an old saying that you cannot introduce anything new these days by just focusing on one discipline. You have to go and pick and choose from instruments in order to come up with something really new and interesting. Today I'm going to talk about computational science and what it means, and here I'm trying to create a foundation for computational law. Computational law is a very new field. However, computational field has been around for many, many years. All of these computational fields, such as computational biology, physics, has been around for many years. So we can go and take a look at these computational fields and learn about how they work and what are the impacts on those fields. And based on them, we can extrapolate and we can talk a little bit about computational law, that's what it means and what we can do at the end. So the thing that today I'm going to talk about different approaches to solving problems. What are different approaches, including computational approaches, and what does computational mean, and why we like to take computational approaches, and how we can take such computational approaches, and what type of tasks we can basically implement using these computational approaches, and what are the impacts of these computational approaches. to the field we apply. Traditionally, there used to be two main approaches to solving problems. One was theory, where you just grab a pen and a piece of paper and then try to directly solve the problem. Example, Albert Einstein, very good stories. Another one is experimental. The people that go to the lab and try to experiment in order to find the right solution to the problem that they are trying to solve. An example is, for example, Edison. The famous story that he and his colleague tried thousands of different materials for light bulb in order to find the right solution. So in addition to this theory and experiment, now we have a third approach for solving problems, namely computational approaches. So computational approaches or computational techniques is a blanket term. It's a very generic term and people just apply to many different things. So I'm just going to give you a very generic, very blanket definition. Pretty much whenever and wherever you are using computers and computer models in order to solve a problem, pretty much you are doing a computational method. Okay? But why? Why we learn to use computers? Okay, so if we don't want to use computers, what else we have to solve problems? Theory and experimentation. But these theory and experimentations have their own limitations. As an example, in theory, we are limited by our analytical, basically. As a human, we are limited by our analytical and processing capabilities. Not everyone is Albert Einstein, and even he had a lot of problems solving the problems analytically. And it took him many, many years to solve, for example, one problem. Experimentation has its own limitations. For example, experimenting can be very expensive, can be dangerous, or even in some such cases, we cannot even experiment. We have just one single shot. As an example, imagine you're a lawyer and you're about to go and do a case in the court of law. You have just one chance. You cannot just go there and experiment and after certificate. So, no, okay, let's try again. So you cannot do experimentation in those cases. This is the place that computational approaches come to play. Basically, computers can numerically solve problems that we cannot analytically solve. Also, we can create some computer simulations that we can run experimentations in that simulated environment again and again very cheaply and without any problem. Also, computers can provide large big data that we as a human cannot. So now that we know about why computational is important, let's talk about how we can apply or how we can basically use these computational techniques. There is a famous quote that mathematics is the language of nature, and computers happen to be really, really good with working with numbers and with applying numerical solutions or numerical methods to solve mathematical equations. So we have a path forward here. And also, many of fields of engineering, science and engineering are very directly connected with mathematics. For example, mechanical systems, electrical systems, or finance. These are many different examples that we are directly dealing with mathematical equations. Mathematical equations represent, model these fields of science and engineering. As a result, we can basically use these mathematical equations, give them to the computer, and the computer can solve the problem or simulate those systems, etc. However, there are fields that are not that much well connected with mathematics. Fields such as, for example, sociology, psychology. How we can program a computer to perform some sort of psychology-related problem. Okay, there are multiple tricks that we can use in order to apply computational techniques to these fields that are not very mathematical friendly. There is this famous cartoon that whenever we look at, for example, fields such as sociology, sociology is nothing more than something that applies psychology, and psychology is nothing more than applied biology, and biology is nothing more than applied chemistry, and chemistry is nothing more than applied physics, and physics is application of mathematics to nature. So we see that by digging back, and just going back, we can really dig up and hit mathematics at some point. Also, it brings a quote that Kevin always tells me about. The quote about law is that this law some sort of social contact that come up, or these laws and regulations are some sort of stable conditions that emerge from the behavior and from the dynamics of the society. And he argues that the answer is the second one, and as well, we can use these underlying dynamics and behavior of society in order to model these laws and regulations. Yes, an example. For example, speed limit. The laws are, for example, the speed. This is a quote from United States Department of Transportation on how they set the speed limits. For speed limits, they go and just move all the speed limit and then the drivers drive freely without any limitations. And then they look at the speed that these drivers are driving, and they set the 85% of this speed. They try to find the speed that 85% of the drivers drive below that. So that is going to be a stable condition, a good point that the free traffic likes to drive around that. So that's going to be the speed limit. So speed limit is going to depend on the speed that 85% of the drivers feel comfortable to drive at or below. So what is this, for example, coming? So how drivers decide at which speed they like to drive? That speed is going to depend on the road condition. It's going to depend on the car. How safe and secure they feel about their own car. How well is suspension. How well is stability control. And also the driver's reaction time. So you see that here, just going by some sort of causal relationship that are connecting the law to the basics of mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and biology. So you see that these things are things that we can easily model with mathematics. So we can somehow create this mathematical model. The problem is that if you want to do this, you are going to need too much of details. It's not going to be that easy to come up with mathematical equations because we need to handle everything. But the good thing is that using this type of modeling will enable us causal and correlational analysis between the laws and the different rules, factors of society, physics, mechanical engineering. There is a second approach that we can use in order to come up with some sort of mathematical representation for these fields that are not very mathematical friendly in order to provide some model to the computers. And this second approach is trying to come up with empirical models for these systems. So imagine, just an imaginary example, imagine you're trying to model the behavior of a judge and how much, for example, this judge usually decides to set the bail for the defendant. So this is just an example, for example, that we observed that, by looking at historical data, the judge usually approximately uses this type of stuff. So this is not something that comes from the biology or chemistry of the judge. This seems like something that can be observed and we can use it as a rule of thumb from the historical data. So this can be, for example, a simple mathematical model that we can use for the behavior of that judge. The third approach, why not let the computers extract these type of underlying mathematical model of the system that we like to study? This is pretty much automation of the second one. So in this approach, we are just going to provide all of those raw data, all of those important critical information to the computer, and let the computer itself extract the model for itself. This is pretty much all just artificial intelligence or machine learning that you will see from. Richard is going to give a presentation on this field, so I'm not going to get too much into this. And okay, now we know how we can apply computation to derive those models and transform those models and give it to the computer, and now computer is capable of doing whatever it can do. So what kind of tasks these computational methods can do for us? This is a list of these tasks that, for example, these computational methods have been very successful to perform, mostly in engineering field. For example, we can use computational methods to design things, to simulate things such as, for example, a crash, what happens in a crash. We can use these models to analyze, and also we can handle large data. These are engineering-based tasks, and capable of talking about the tasks for computational law that this computational techniques can do for us in computational law. Okay, so now that we know about what type of tasks these type of computational approaches can do, the question is, who are going to lose and who are going to win after we come up with these type of approaches? The first loser is going to be the practitioner of the old methods. This is a bunch of designers and old GM design studio. These guys are better to know how to use CAD tools, otherwise they are about to lose their jobs. The winners is going to be the firms or individuals that have been able to adapt to the new technology, adopt it, and also use this new technology to come up with better, cheaper, safer products, and this will give them an edge over their competitors. Another winner is going to be all of those companies that have been using these computational software and tools. These are some of the famous companies in engineering. They basically provide software and computational tools for the other companies that design consumer products. Kevin can probably going to speak about the other companies that are working for computational law. Another winner is going to be the end consumer. By applying these computational techniques, we can come up with cheaper products, so at the end, the consumer will be paying less for a better product. And surprisingly, in a twisted way, those practitioners are going to be the winners, because now, when all of these jobs are going to be automated, they don't need to do those jobs anymore. They can just focus on more creative, innovative jobs. Okay? So let's talk about what are going to be the effects. Imagine we came up with some computational tools to do some specific tasks for a field. This X is a placeholder, and it can be everything in this list. It can be computational biology, it can be computational law, or whatever. Does that mean that now that computer is automated and computers can do this, does that mean that we don't need to know and learn about that specific field? The history of computational approaches has proved us that the answer is no. We still need to know and learn and educate ourselves and our students about that field, although it is automated. So let's take a look at the reasons. Even if we have these computational methods that can automate all of those processes, we still need people to apply those computational methods to interpret the results and outputs and to verify that are they correct or not, and deploy them. In other words, we cannot have a monkey just sit behind the computer. The person that is going to use it still needs to understand them. Another reason is that although those concepts are automated, all of those methods are automated, there are other methods, concepts that are going to be based on that. They are just a foundation for other topics. As a result, we need to know about them, although we may not be directly using them, but we need to know those concepts in order to basically expand them. And another reason that someone has to write those softwares, someone has to come up with a computational method, so we still need to know those methods in order to automate them. This was a little bit of unconventional topic, and I tried to be creative and come up with different topics or different concepts from different sources. So I did my best, but I'm pretty sure that I'm not even claiming that this is a comprehensive, perfect presentation about the field. So please feel free if you have any comments or if you missed anything or thoughts or insights on this. So thanks a lot.
So, are you entertaining questions?
I'm sorry.
Are you entertaining questions?
Yeah.
Okay. The first one, in terms of deep learning, we need transparency in the law as well as transparency in the government. So deep learning tends to hide that transparency because we don't really know what's going on inside the model that's being created. Number two, you said we can't really practice or we can't experiment with the law. And my question to you or anybody would be, wouldn't a mock jury be that experiment?
Let me take that on. I mean, in fact, there are companies that are doing mock juries now. And it is an experiment, but I think there's still a point that, first of all, there's a difference between a mock jury and a real jury. And there's, you know, a jury is one thing, right? And maybe we can do a little bit of experimenting around the margins. But when you're making an argument before a court, imagine there's no experimenting with the Supreme Court, right? Even if you got model,
it's a one shot.
It would be an approximation, but it really wouldn't be an actual thing. So you're going to just sort of end up with an approximation at best. So I think it's a valid point. But I will say, and I'll come back to it later too, about the hiding that you're talking about with deep learning. Could you tell us about that a little bit?
So basically, the question that you asked is basically the main topic of debate today in deep learning and artificial intelligence. There is this debate over interpretability of a learning machine versus the performance. There are techniques in artificial intelligence and machine learning that are very interpretable. Techniques such as decision trees or expert systems that after the system gives you a solution, you can ask it, why did you fail? So the system can explain it to you, and as a result, you can verify the logic. That's the basic interpretable machine learning, but the performance is not going to be that good. As a rule of thumb, this is a very rough estimate. Expert systems are hard to go above 80%, but again, it's a very rough estimate. On the other side, we have a whole different class of artificial machine learning techniques that basically are extremely complex systems. Many deep learning systems, it is hard to observe what is happening inside. Not purely black box, but it is very hard to observe what is happening inside. So they are not interpretable. The system will not be able to explain itself why it came up with decision A or B, but the performance is very amazing. So we are standing between two options, performance versus interpretable. However, there are people that are working on interpretable deep learning. That is one of DARPA's latest projects called interpretable, explainable deep learning, that they try to somehow combine these two together. It is a field of research, an ongoing field of research. I don't know when and how we can come and arrive at that. I'm going to add another comment from a more philosophical aspect that do we really need to know about interpretability? Do we need to expect interpretability and explainability from machine learning, from an intelligent agent or not? If you look at humans as a model that we are trying to basically duplicate, we are not explainable, but in terms of, for example, that we are looking at a dog or a cat, and our brain says that it's a dog or it's a cat. We can still come up with some sort of interpretability, yeah, it has eyes or things like this. But when we look at our brain, for example, it is going to be a lot of neurons, billions of neurons are connected through billions of synapses, and to this day we have not been able to understand how our brain exactly works. Although we know about the dynamics of individual neurons, but it is that this entire task is happening in a distributed parallel way. We cannot put our fingers on a single part of, oh, this part says cat, this part says dog because of this. No, it is an emergent behavior. Intelligence is an emergent behavior of a complex system. Some argue that intelligence is a bottom-up system. It is emerges out of it. It is not a reductionism. Explainability is a part of reductionism. When you try to solve a problem and you reduce it to subsystems, and you reduce until you get it, you observe that how you are solving the problem because you are going top to bottom. But in solutions that are bottom-up, those bits and pieces come together, and all of a sudden something emerges, such as intelligence out of it. Don't expect interpretability from those type of systems. This is a philosophical answer that I'm going to give, but people are still arguing about this. And some people in deep learning really believe that it is not that important, interpretability. Some people believe that no, it is important. One of the examples that people that believe that performance is more important than interpretability is that they ask this question from the people that prefer interpretability. Imagine we are going to have a brain surgery and you have two AI machine that can perform the surgery. One has 99% of success rate, but we don't know what it's exactly doing. Another one has 50% of success rate. Exactly no. What are you going to choose?
Give me the 19.
Go with the answer. You're talking about transparency with deep learning, right? Most deep learning networks right now are built around policy gradient, which is just, it's like a mathematical reinforcement function when you tell the program that it's doing well and when it's not doing well. This learns over time iteratively how often it does well. But the problem is that if you force people to reveal that, or also their seeding, which is just basically how they nudge it in the right direction off the beginning, then essentially they're bringing nothing to the table except for their computing power. And so there's proprietary value to those equations that you're probably not going to get them to reveal. So there's no incentive to develop them.
Yeah, but do we as a society want to hand over power to an algorithm or to a machine learning model that we don't understand? How much are we willing to turn life over to the unknown?
That would be as bad as turning it over to politicians.
Yeah.
Well, at least have a good
They will come up with different,
Yeah.
presentations of the same one.
Yeah.
So then you just hand it to the computer and do it for you.
Yeah.
And you're also missing out on the, politics are inherently illogical. And this is not
He's corruptible.
It tends to be working to a different end than a lot of people either believe they are or believe they should be.
right.
They're doing what benefits themselves and how people naively believe that politicians are doing the best for us.
Exactly. But a computer system, you would argue, is doing what's best for the data that is given, is doing the best that it can do. And it's not somehow looking out for itself. It doesn't have any secrets. It's something that you look into.
There's still a difference between brain surgery example and let's say the decision whether somebody's guilty or innocent. Because in the brain surgery example, you see after the fact whether the person recovered or died. Whereas if, let's say you had a machine that decided whether someone was innocent or guilty, we don't know after the fact necessarily whether it was made the correct verdict.
Right.
Yeah, we're talking about machines for what you're talking about. The question I have, for a lack of knowing how the machine came to its conclusion, is if they're learning from us, how do we isolate our biases out of their equations?
Because they can model what we're already doing, or they can improve upon.
Let me just jump in on that because, bias is a big problem, right? And there was recently a face recognition system. Have you heard about this one? The face recognition system that was trained all by, white males, and it couldn't recognize anyone else as human. Right? So that's like a problem. So we do have to, and I think part of the solution to that, and part of what, I hope that we, as a community, right, is that it's really essential, and I think one of the weaknesses of where we are right now, that we get a population involved in developing these products that's as diverse as our population in general. Right? We need more diversity in this. There's just no doubt about that. If we're, and I'm talking in particular about AI and the law, if we're going to achieve the kinds of things that we might be able to achieve, it's only going to happen if we have, because I'll tell you, the problem is in cities, they build a system that embeds systemic inherited bias, and you put, $100 billion into developing it, it's going to be entrenched. It's going to be deeply entrenched. So it's really important at this point that we early on get a much more diversity involved in this area for the success of the enterprise. So, yeah, this is great.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions. Was back to here, the idea of the bail, the judge, the equation for bail bonds or bailing out, whatever it may be. It's a simple equation. I know it's just an example, but do we include it? Is it better simple, or do we include the judge's input on when the launch date, what time of day it is, and start putting as many variables as we can, which would include some bias and would probably lead to figuring out the bias.
That's important. That's a model that we use to, if the computational models to represent the phenomenon.
And there is a famous quote about models that all models are wrong, but some of them are sometimes useful. So it's going to be about which model do we want to use for that specific application. Sometimes a simple model, just that simple model was enough. Sometimes no, we need a little bit more complex model that take into account of what the judge aimed at as a launch that day. So it's choosing model is one of the most important things that we have to basically, is that machine learning, for example, you have to choose models. Some, even in deep learning, you have to type the parameters and you have to set it. So that's a part of the designer's job to find the right model for the right problem. There is such thing that the perfect model that you can just throw it around for everything. It depends on what you're looking at and how much details you want to take. Also, I did someone that I believe that has talked about, for example, that using AI for a jury and this is my personal opinion here, but I personally believe that AI should not be an executioner. AI should be an assistant, and that is the place that I always just draw the red line. AI should not be autonomously after a human being as a cop or as a whatever. That's as an assistant, this is perfect. But I draw the line when an AI component itself wants to make a decision and execute it about the human. That's personally.
But aren't you producing a limitation to that? Because just like you guys were saying, if we really relinquish control, you would have to have like a pilot. And the only thing I can think of is making a city that ran autonomously on computers.
Yeah, that is one of the ethics in AI is one of the things that people are basically pursuing about artificial intelligence, about the ethics. We have to come up with a set of rules and regulations for ourselves that what we should do, is it ethical or what it's not. Some people even talk about somehow embed ethics into the AI, the learning machine. It should be a part of it. It should be a part of its logic. So that's again another open problem that people are debating over that how it should. So that's something we really need to keep in mind. We are developing those tools.
Because ethics is based on emotion.
And it can be modeled emotions or not, or that's another thing that we have.
That's
We have time for one more question. You had a question back there, and then I want to comment on a question. Here's a lot of talk in the hypothetical, where this is taking us to technology. Law, computational law, and also heading over the reins in our everyday life. I feel like a lot of it is already involved. There was a New York proprietary software that is sensing suggestions to judges, which often are followed, and you don't know what it's based on. It's private company, so it's already here. And I'll have a question on that. And the other thing is, I hear the question: are we going to handle the range of our lives to technology? But we already did. You get a car, you get a brake assist system, you should say if you trust it, you must feel it. It's already here. So the question is, and especially with the legal aspect, how much is academia looking at the existing technology? Are you really looking at the empirical evidence? Because you're speculating about AI, but what about this specific software that's already affecting the lives and stuff? And you have a comment on that? Or?
There are many comments actually that Kevin can comment on it better than I will. The existing companies that today there are already, as you mentioned, there are companies that are working on computational law. Kevin can comment on it much better than I can. I don't have any insider information about what is the technology, how good it is at this point. Is it a hype or it is just it is real? I don't know about it. But still, it is very, very new technology at this point. I don't have insider information of how well they are. But there are, yes, you are correct. Many companies, many new startup companies are working on those approaches.
Let me just follow up. I mean, one of as far as the academy in general goes, that's a broad spectrum of things, right? I was at the ABA Legal Tech Show last week and heard some of the industry leaders. And one of the reasons that I think this group is important groups like this are important, ones that want to get out of the silo and think more broadly about social implications of what we're doing, is that frankly, there's not enough of that happening right now. It's amazing to see how siloed the lawyers tend to be in thinking that these are legal problems and this technology is really intended to make my practice more efficient or represent my client more effectively or, make more money, frankly. And, the problem is the bar associations, having the bar associations in charge of this is kind of like asking the tobacco industry to be concerned with lung health. It's not going to actually do what it needs to do because it's not in their interest, right? And so we really need, and I think the role for the Academy is to take on these questions about big social issues, but it has to be done interdisciplinarily. Getting out of the silo, that's the thing, right? And that's what we really need to be doing. And I think groups like this can be immensely powerful in helping to bring that about. So, I think at this point we should take a brief break and reload new slides and fix our technology problems.
Get bagels. Coffee. Get scones.
This is actually broadcasting the right way. I just logged in and checked it.
I remember, I think you were the one who brought up the point about how data can be biased.
Yeah.
One thing that I was thinking about when you were saying that is that there's a big difference depending on the location of the question. With descriptive, it's not actually doing any damage. So, for example, you take, for example, cop footage. That's going to be pretty gnarly to deal with in terms of bias, because they're going to act in a certain way. If you're going to use that as data, well, your AI is going to turn out like the average cop, which may or may not be what you want. But if you're using it as a descriptive method, then you can actually it could be used, I think, especially with interpretable AI. And of course, this is just me speculating.
Yeah.
I think it can be used to figure out what things are specific, which can be useful, because if you figure out what factors are going into specific decisions, for example, cop cameras, or figuring out what the cop is doing, and why is the cop reacting as it does to a specific situation, you can figure out what biases are there. That's at least what I think could happen. But if you're using it prescriptively, for example, to advise a judge, then you're going to be carrying in some implications depending on the data.
But with that, don't you see it as in a direction become competitive? Whereas, hey, this cop reacted in such a way, it now produces that mindset for the rest of the program.
Yes.
Where, okay, he reached for his weapon, immediately the computer thinks, oh, there's a, let's say just throwing out a number, 32% chance he's going to shoot that person. Or what happens then on? Does that then change the landscape at which
I think,
yards to get?
well, again, if that's used prescriptively, if we're using, AI to assist cops on what to do, that can be disastrous, because then it biases that it took from the data. For example, take AI. That's the most drastic example. She was given a bunch of data by interactions on Twitter. A lot of them were trolls from racist web forums. Yeah, so she turned out racist. That's because that was a prescriptive situation. She was taking data and then applying it. If we can develop an AI that instead of interpreting, taking data and then applying it somewhere else, and basically basing this learning. And that's, for example, a black box AI, deep learning. But if you had an AI that could take the information and then give you an interpretable version of it, which gives you basically the figured out algorithm for what's going on, it can help you analyze the statistical information and figure out what's contributing to it.
So it's because you're saying that it would spit out different types of solutions, different factors, and then compile.
And if you can figure out what the factors are and how they affect the situation, you can help fix them. You can change the situation. Just because something is telling you the future doesn't mean you can't change it. And that's important, whether or not you're letting it define the future, or if you're allowing it to tell you what the future will be, and then you can take steps.
I guess it's like a weapon, right? Depending on who's banned it is, and that's just the way it's going to work. Because even if I were to pull the different factors in that way, if you say, well, it's giving me these solutions, and I can say that's not necessarily what I want. I want this particular solution, so that I'll drive and then feed the information that I want to give me that specific result every single time.
Well, of course, if you're picking data and cherry picking the data to feed to the AI, so it gives you always the same answer, that's defying the point of the AI itself, right? Which I think that the key is that you use AI to kind of like use it as a diagnostic, and that's what it's used for. That's where the AI, there's a lot of funding coming from cancer research, from various medical fields, because they realize that with diagnostics, again, you're looking for a descriptive kind of algorithm, not one that tells you what to do. That's for doctors to decide, but one that tells you what's going to happen. And for example, they've been able to figure out that a hospital, for example, had vents that were bad just by pulling all the data about people that were being pulled in and like why were some of them dying, and they couldn't figure out why they had specific mortality rates in different areas of the hospital. And because they pulled all of this data and put it through deep learning, they could figure out that event was that hadn't been changed in years. And like that kind of information absolutely cannot be taken. And that information, it's biased in the sense that it's taking in these factors, and it values all these factors equally because it doesn't care if it's like the really angry nurse that comes in the morning because she's an alcoholic, or if it's a vent that would happen. And I think that that's where AI is useful, if it's used as a descriptive method. But we can't let AI decide for us. We need to understand what AI has to give us, and then make our own decision.
See, that's what I was curious about. Is like, if we gave it those limitations, as opposed to, what if we reverse the metric, right? What if we said, hey, AI, make us happy? Everybody's definition of that is completely different.
Absolutely.
Like, for example, I have a friend, all he wants to do for the rest of his life is sit on his couch about Netflix. I want to go out and experience the world. You know what I mean? So
absolutely. Like, people's visions of utopia is why we have political issues in the first place. Like, try talking about utopia to a right winger or a left winger, you're going to get very different answers.
Exactly. And it's like...
And that's the danger, and that's the authoritarian really talks about, because it is very different.
And that's how I see the program.
And it's still a program, that's what I was going to say. It's still a program.
Because, like, for example, the way that I script versus the way that one of my colleagues scripts, it's completely different. And so, whereas his perfect inventory script is one way, I may go about it a completely different way because of the way that I see it.
That's why I said it's important to have a diversity.
Absolutely.
So that you can have a wider.
Because if you're prioritizing one train of thought over another, like I'm noticing this right now in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of like political bias, and like people are getting fired because they disagree with their opinions or thoughts. Because they introduce politics so predominantly into the workplace, it limits the diversity of thought, and at least in my opinion, it impoverishes the whole culture, which is a shame because again, like I strongly believe in diversity of thought as well as and you end up with different priorities as to like what AI should be doing. If you have a firm that's talking about, you know, how AI can benefit society, and all of them have one idea of how society should be, well, guess what you're gonna get? It's the AI that's gonna do what you need to do. It's not gonna be useful to the entire population if it's only describing the utopian view of maybe 20% of the whole industry, and they all happen to work in the same firm because it's California and liberals. I'm not trying to take it here. It doesn't matter if they're Republican, if they're any other kind of political party, but they're going to respect that, and because they're the ones that have all the resources, all the resources. Silicon Valley is very much a capital to compute time. At least that's how I see it. You know, triangle is certainly up and rising, and I'm happy for that because I prefer the triangle. I like how we have like this past in biology, so it's all for tradition. I think it has a better culture overall. That's just my personal take. Don't judge me for it too hard. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're going into like a really big, new world.
Yeah.
It really is because, like, honestly, there will be potentially a day like the Matrix. Like everybody just plugs in and hey, now I'm going to go into my utopia, and then okay, I'm going to disconnect and now I'm back here.
I can say we kind of are, right? I can go into my own utopia. I mean, Netflix uses their intelligence to tell you, well, this is recommended based on what you watch the same thing over and over. I mean, like, I can get around it. It's just how people and
Oh, I forgot to go because money can get us. Because you have, again, like it's all being taken from an industry standpoint. You have academic environment, which absolutely, like, I think sometimes the fact that you have university and you have tenure professors, you can do a lot of research that is directly pertinent to your ethical concerns, as opposed to an industry where you're more focused on something that will give you a profit. And I'm not trying to say that industry is unethical, but I will say that, for example, a professor that I know in NC State focuses in cryptography, and she's working on rendering Bitcoin transactions anonymous. It's a big problem. And like, I don't know if I'm presenting exactly. It's very informal. I don't know anything. I'm an undergrad. I'm a sophomore in undergrad. I don't know anything, but I do care about privacy. And she's working on it. And I don't think that privacy with Bitcoin is a big priority to Bitcoin right now. Because you have a lot of companies that have already been selling data that don't care about customer data and where it's going. They sell it to third parties. They don't care. They're still doing fine. Amazon is not struggling by any means, but they still do not respect privacy. That is not a priority for the industry. It's very evident. So from what I can see, the only way you can deal with that is by kind of removing the problem of profit. Which is also important. I don't know, like again, please tell me that I'm wrong, because I do like to talk. It's not like I'm saying that I'm right. I recognize that I'm.
The way that you phrase it actually like interesting, because as far as money will take us, like just using that notion, like greed, we look at it and we're like, man, it's kind of a bad thing. Like you're destroying impoverished nations.
No, I don't think that it's a bad thing though.
But that's what I was going to say. It was like, if you look at it the other way, it's what actually impulsed us to get to this level.
Oh, absolutely. No, I am absolutely for, like, I think that greed is like the least worst of like the sins, basically. That's a little bit too philosophical. I just think that greed is useful because it's where it takes us forward. Like, if we don't want more, if we don't aspire to do more, we're not going to move forward.
It's at what expense?
At what expense? And also,
if you're on someone else's throat,
exactly.
That's completely
and
different.
also, large population. Also, like right now, our market when it comes to this kind of industry, it's very much crowned by like a few big names. And you have like a certain tendency, and at that point the tendency is really hard to move. Even though there is a public appeal for privacy, a lot of larger companies are not moving in that direction because they're too big. There's not enough competition for them to really have that influence. And of course, like at an idealistic goal, that kind of drives you.
Let us resume. We'll take it to the break. What I love to see is there's so many conversations going on. This is a good moment if you need to have to sign up for the Slack. Pass that around here. Take that one, pass it around. Let me do a couple of other things that we had such a kind of awkward start that I didn't get to do. First of all, where is Drew? Drew, come on up here a second. Drew, Carol, come on up for a second. First of all, I want to thank Drew and Carol, who are the current leadership of the Legal Hackers group here at Campbell. Carol is our secretary today, still doing a lot of work, and I appreciate that. We got him up here. He said, "This is our incoming leader for next year. We're looking forward to your also a tremendous amount of time and effort today, so I really appreciate that." And he doesn't know I'm going to do this. We have with us as honored guest the leadership of the AI Club. And why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is John Lynch, and I'm the president of the club.
I'm Beata Eaton, and I'm the vice president of the club.
And you
tell us, can you say anything about the club?
It's a great place to come and learn both full skills with AI systems and to have discussions about the opportunities and challenges it poses.
Excellent, excellent. Well, like I said, we're running behind, so let me get started. But I appreciate it. I really do think this has been a terrific start for this group. And, you know, this is our first year of having this student chapter, and it really is exciting for me as the faculty advisor for them, because I see, and I really sincerely believe that it's this kind of group, this grassroots group that's going to change, to make the change that's necessary. Be the change, right? Be the change. We have the old ways and the new ways, and I think my experience has been that, and I've had most people who have the same experience would agree with me, it's tremendously hard to work with the legal profession, which is often very, very attached to the old ways, right? For a lot of reasons. And I remember this was a few years ago talking to a managing partner at a firm here in town and saying, you know, how are you doing with technology, right? And the answer was, we're doing great. Everyone has email. It's like, yeah, that's not where we are. So we need to be that change. The question is, you know, where are we, really? And so, I mean, I'm a philosopher. I'm kind of a proud philosopher. Yes, philosophy. Right. So I'm a philosopher, and like, it's a strange thing to be a philosopher in this space, frankly. Because people say, I ask philosophical questions about this, right? And I want to just make the case really quickly. You know, not the most recent set. It's really weird. So we'll muddle through. To understand, you know, that's the first, I think, and main reason, you know, to understand better what's going on. To change our perspectives, right? To understand at a more fundamental level. I may need to change out the slides. To think about what social meaning is, right? We know where we're going. So we can have some sense of where we're going and to be able to think more creatively about it. So let me begin our discussion of computational law itself. We've had a full introduction to what's going on, I think, in computation today. But notice that, you know, we use that term computation today so casually, with I don't think much real awareness of, it's a fairly new thing, right? If you were to talk about computers or computing in, say, 1965, you'd be talking about a group of people who sat in a room with, you know, pads of paper, right? So the fact that we can talk about computation today and think about installed systems on machines is a new thing, right? And, you know, one of the things that philosophers are often concerned about is conceptual clarity or conceptual analytics. What happens when concepts change? Well, philosophy has too, and I don't think it's often kept up. So the formal definition of computational law is a subdivision of legal informatics. Well, that's not too helpful as a definition. Legal informatics is the study of structure and properties of legal information. That's an interesting idea. It's a librarian's type of term, right? I'm thinking about what is the structure, or they'll use the specialized term ontology of legal information, as well then as the application of technology in organizations. I want to make one real quick comment, because it kind of came up, you know, how should you think about this? I think one thing that we need to keep in mind when we talk about technology, it's something that I think maybe philosophers are a little more aware of. These things are just the latest step in something that's been going on for a long time. I like to say, you know, one of the philosophers, Andy Clark, who has this book called Natural Born Cyborgs. And he makes the point that human beings are the only creatures that will intentionally add technology to change their cognitive abilities. Nothing else does that, right? And we've been doing it forever, right? If you have a pencil is a cognitive enhancement device. It lets you write things down. And the technology and material culture of reading actually changes the anatomical configuration of the brain. I'm told, and I don't really know, but that a neuroanatomist can look at a brain sitting on a plate and tell you what language group the person's spoken of. Right? And language shapes who we are, and our ability to read shapes that as well. Right? So we're constantly changing our brains. We're constantly changing who we are. This is the latest iteration. Frankly, all due respect, I don't like the term artificial intelligence today because it's so hyped and it's so overused. But think of it as cognitive enhancement, right? Think of it as cognitive enhancement. And I'll tell you, you want to be the change. Here's a question for you. How many people would like to compete with people who have cognitive enhancement without having it themselves, right? That's what's at stake. And I think that's often lost when we talk about this in the law. It's like, oh, it's something frightening. It's going to take over my job. You know, I heard someone say this last week. AI won't take lawyers' jobs, but lawyers who know how to use AI will displace those who don't. Right? That's cognitive enhancement. It's data point two. We need humans here, right? It's great. Enhance your cognition. Use the tools. But human beings, you know, AI is great, and it makes sort of really silly mistakes sometimes. And there's a set of mistakes that AI makes. Human beings are really have capabilities, but we make a different set of mistakes. And so when you put the two together, you can make fewer mistakes. So I think that's really the point, right? Better calculations and fewer mistakes. So computational law, in a sense, is taking advantage of cognitive enhancement that's been going around. There's a great, if you ever want to read something that's kind of amusing, it's a really strange piece in some ways, but it's early dialogue by Plato. We have Socratic dialogue called the Phaedrus. And what I love about reading it is, you know, Socrates is illiterate. And in the Phaedrus, he complains about writing. Like, oh gosh, people who, you know, can read and write, you know, they won't use their brains the same way. You know, they won't have the same memory. They won't have the same intellectual skills. It sounds a lot like the things that people say today about the new technology. And I think in some ways, I honestly believe in some ways, what we're witnessing is a change in technology, information technology, on the same scale as as learning to read and write. And that certainly had a huge impact on the way law exists and is practiced and developed. There was certainly an oral tradition of law, but very different. And one of the things that happened that shows that history is unexpected change. I think that's where we are now, too. So, computational law, there's a formal definition. I love this. This is Claude Shannon, the father of modern information theory. His quote is, information is the revolution on certainty. And he means this at a very elemental level. So when we talk about law as information, we need to really think about what's going on here. Does information technology, if it resolves uncertainty, look at this statement, Juliet is the sun. It is literally nonsense, right? Literally nonsense. Anyone who said that and believed it to be literally true would be crazy, right? But it has meaning. It certainly has meaning. It has meaning to people who know what the experience being picked out is, right? It's a reference. It's inviting people in who already understand. And language is often like that. And legal language is often like that. So when we ask this question, how is law computable? I think this is a very interesting question. We have to remember, law is primarily semantic information. It's words with a grammar and syntax, right? It's increasingly being expressed as binary data, but it isn't binary data, right? It's taken up and it represents words. And law is structured as structured data and standardized formats is becoming more and more common, right? And I think this is part of the promise, but also part of the threat that we can see here at a very elemental level, right? What's the significance? This is a philosopher quote. What's the significance of legal processes becoming algorithms, right? And what's the legal processes being analyzed for repeatability, you know, the repeating forms? These are new things that are happening with computational law. And we need to think very carefully about the significance. I want to just give us some ideas. One thing that we also need to talk about is complexity, right? I think, and I always tell my students that complexity isn't complicated, it's a different thing. Complexity is actually a type of system, complex dynamic system in terms of law. I have to give thanks to J.B. Rule and Professor Vanderbilt for this example. I'll tell you, that's a spider and a grasshopper. It's his example. I use this all the time. Imagine a grassy field, right? And you have grasshoppers. And you have two different kinds of spiders. You have hunting spiders and trapping spiders, right? Now here's the grasshopper's problem. Hop around too much, you're going to find a trap, right? You don't hop around enough, you're going to get hunted, right? So we have here a system that's in equilibrium. The grasshopper has to find that sweet spot strategy to maximize its chance to be alive, right? If you change the ratio of spiders, what happens? The dynamic equilibrium happens, right? He's got to find a new sweet spot. Do more trapping spiders, you know. Now here's the question I'll ask the math coach. Can you say anything in general about the distribution of grasshoppers based on the ratio of the spiders?
In terms of spatial distribution?
Yeah. Well, average, yeah. You don't know. Maybe, right? That's unlikely. Right? So this is the point of distribution in systems like this, right? So here's one of, and Rule's point actually, is the law is often this way too. You can think of something like the securities regulation and the stock market. Right? They're coupled systems. The stock market has its own equilibrium. The regulatory regime has its equilibrium. And they're coupled in the sense that if you change the regulations, it's going to have an impact on the market. Things that are happening in the market are going to have an impact on the regulations, right? So they're coupled systems, coupled dynamic systems, right? And there is some ability to make predictions about what's going on there, right? If we think of law in those terms, then we can see that artificial intelligence in law begins to make some more sense, right? And I know Professor Rule's doing a project where he's trying to model how that plays out, right? So the big uses right now are prediction. One of them for predicting the outcomes, and we talked a little bit about this analysis of. I'm not going to name company names because that's how we're doing, but the analysis of law, judges, lawyers, outcomes, and you can get some fairly fine-grained companies out that will, in particular areas of law, offer some fine-grained analysis of outcomes, right? So you might even on a motion-by-motion basis be able to get some prediction within a percent error of what the outcome is going to be, you know, with that judge on that motion and those lawyers and other kinds of information as well. That's hugely useful in litigation analytics if you want to think about the outcome of the litigation. Also risk analysis. I think one of the big areas nowadays is risk analysis, right? Because once you can begin to have a quantifiable result, percent of risk for an outcome, plus evaluation of it, it begins to look a lot like, you know, a security, doesn't it? Right? You have a litigation then that can be analyzed, and you can apply things like portfolio theory to building out a portfolio of cases, and this is actually happening. I think one of the leaders in this field are the insurance companies that, and one recently, you know, saved a huge amount of money by just re-examining the portfolio of cases that they have and rebalancing them out so that, you know, there was limited risk. So that's a huge area. Dispute resolution, I think we'll be seeing this. I'm a little concerned with, you know, replacing judges on some things. Traffic tickets, I'm not so concerned about. Right? And a lot of sort of routine kinds of things. But if you think about what a benefit that is to our court system to be able to unload some of those routine, repetitive things that are going on. Practice management, being able to actually use the data that the firms collect so much data over time, billing data, all sorts of data, being able to use that to find patterns in there to make it more efficient and more effective, and also to reduce the risk to the firm. The other area where we're seeing this now increasingly is in drafting, which is really kind of amazing to me. Contract drafting is now, there's some wonderful systems out there that can help, you know, literally give a term sheet to, which may be generated by a chatbot, right? And then turn that term sheet over to a program that'll go through a huge database of contracts and find the one that's most likely tell you what the industry standard for a contract like that is like automatically populate it with the new terms and check to update the law. I used to do all that for a living, so it's a kind of the, and one company is now telling us that more legal search companies, which is the next slide, but even briefs can be drafted automatically. So does that mean you're going to replace the humans? No, because I'm still going to want to check that contract. I'm still going to want to read that brief, but AI and law, right? So the other thing is legal search. We have case law being searched now, natural language searches in case law, document searching that's been around with discovery, automated forms, and that's like, again, this idea of finding the ideal expression of a form, and that can be like an SEC filing or, quite a wide range of things going on there. And the sort of contract development and analysis, which is the best contract for this. What kinds of standard terms are there? What are the options? When do you use the options? All of that is being developed now by some of the biggest companies, and some of them here in the area. It brings some philosophical question. I'm just going to run through these a little quickly. How is this semantic information then related to binary information? It's supposed to just represent it, but often it seems to do more. I thought two quotes were useful here. One is from the anthropologist Clifford Geertz, who wrote a great deal about law and anthropology. He said, "Law is a distinctive way that a culture imagines the real." And what he meant by that is, from his anthropological perspective, law embodies our hopes and dreams and aspirations and helps us express those in the society that we create, right? Think about how technology might be impacting that for a minute. Right? And the other one is Jürgen Habermas. So let me just locate that quote for you briefly. I think one of the, if law, this idea that law is part of a social system was developed in the 90s by a philosopher named Nicholas Luhmann. Luhmann's a really important philosopher, I think. He talked about law as sort of discrete information systems, or he called them systems of communication. But he, I think, almost menacingly said, in an odd way, he said, the thing is, humans don't communicate. Communication communicates. And what he meant by that is, once we have these networks of communication developed and deployed, they have a life of their own. They have needs of their own, demands of their own, that don't make on us as communication systems. Habermas called that the facticity of law. And he said the problem is those social systems exist, but it's often the case that law is trapped between those social systems and kinds of hopes and dreams and aspirations that Geertz is talking about, right? How do we find law that satisfies our need to be human, to have those bigger ambitions, those normative dreams and aspirations satisfied, but also can deal with the facticity of social systems, hardwired systems, communication systems that increasingly take on a life of their own. I saw MIT has a program, and it's a great program, part of their, I think it's part of their school of media, the Media Lab. And it's a program in law, and they have some great people there. And I saw somebody giving a talk on a video recently, and he was saying that, we now know the law is a social system. It's hardwired, it's fast. And he's right about that. I think that facticity is there. But if we lose the fact that there's a human dimension to it, a human element to it, then we've lost probably our own humanity and our ability of our legal political system to address the needs of us human beings. So that's one of the things. The other question, though, is about log data sets. And I just wanted to say, you're sitting there in your practice, and sometimes I always had that feeling. I often thought of beautiful tropical chits when I was practicing in my office. And, but is that all there is, right? And one of the things I want to say is, well, we'll get to this. Blockchain is the other thing that I haven't really talked about yet. Blockchain, and where you have blockchain speaker coming up, so I'm not going to say about it. It's an open distributed ledger system. Think of it as a notebook that everyone can see, but you can't change it without polling everyone to get them to agree, right? It supplies trust to transactions. This is is an interesting thing, right? It's totally this is one of the great achievements of blockchain. It provides trust into transactions. What's the social impact of relying? There's a difference between trust and reliance. What blockchain really does is provide reliance into a system. Something reliable. Is that trust, right? And so one of the questions is, can you have reliance without that human dimension to trust? What happens when you take the human dimension out? Can an information system really replace trusting a person in a social community context, right? Or does it change us when we don't trust people, but we trust social systems in lieu of people, right? And I think that's something that really hasn't been thought about enough. I quoted Heraclitus here, character is destiny. What does it do to the character of the people? That's the question. Yes. That's the end of my slides, but I did have one more point, and that is about the silos. We need to get out of our silos. We need to, here's the, and sadly my last set of slides didn't upload for some reason, but I had pictures there of AlphaGo. And you know, AlphaGo is Google's AI that last year, about this time last year, finally achieved what was considered to be a great landmark in having an AI system win at the game of Go, right? I played Go since I was a child. My dad was devoted. He was so devoted to it. He and his brother played all the time. And when he passed away, he and his brother ended up being buried side by side. They built in concrete, a Go board between them so they could still play. I thought it was one of the beautiful images. But Go is an interesting game. It's typical, you know, the point is to surround each other with your stones. And it's typical that the Go board sort of develops from the edges in, right? So I think it's in the second game between AlphaGo and the Go masters, Lee Sedol. The AlphaGo puts the stone in the middle of the board. And sadly, the photo's not there, but the picture of the expression on the Go master's face when it did that is one of absolute horror. It's like, oh my gosh, he's playing in the middle. What's it doing playing in the middle, right? And he takes a break and, you know, walks around and thinks about it for a while, comes back, finishes the game. And, you know, typically what happens is the game, like I say, it evolves from the middle to from the edges to the middle. Well, you don't see it until later in the game, but that stone being there was the critical difference. It unites two patterns that it had been trying to develop and had anticipated would develop way in advance of what the Go expert. It says something to me about the limitations of human beings and being able to see how different patterns relate. That the software do a much better job than us in seeing how these patterns relate and anticipate where they're going. This is one of the reasons too that I think it's absolutely crucial that we get out of our silos, because a lot of the benefit that's out there with this technology lies beyond any particular data set. It lies in figuring out how the stock market's coupled with you know, the securities regulations and being able to model that and other things that we probably can't even imagine. Other data sets that are maybe out there and extremely relevant, we have no idea what they are, right? And so we need to, you know, critically, with sort of a critical openness perhaps, begin to think about how to use this outside of the box. And I think critically for the social good. That's the other thing. I wanted to come back to Larry King and BlackRock. That idea that the companies that will last the longest, the industries that will last the longest are the ones that are providing genuine service to humanity. I fully believe that. If you want to have a company that's going to be here for 50 years from now, it has to be doing something meaningful. It can't just be moving paper around or solving problems that are just incremental and incidental. We have the ability to do that and to be that kind of change. And I think it starts here. So thank you all. Anyone have any questions? Yes.
So I was hoping you could give a little bit more information on the dispute resolution. Like it didn't show you about hands they already come with a background and a strong understanding of things in the hard sciences and technology, et cetera. which is sitting in front of a judge who can be a generalist and doesn't have a background in any of these types of issues.
So, yeah, I mean, I say that what I know about dispute resolution tends to be at the sort of low end of the controversy, things like, you know, traffic tickets and sort of routine contract matters. But the ability to value the case adds certainly, if you have a, if you have a % likelihood of winning and a good idea what the value of the case is, you can do some math and figure out what the good settlement value is, right? And so that's the kind of thing I have in mind. And my guess is in the future, as the technology improves, that you'll find like insurance companies demanding that as a clause in your policy, that you submit to some sort of thing like that, which is kind of neat in that, if you have a car accident or a routine car accident, you'll be able to go out, maybe have your claims adjuster take a picture of it and then cut a check for you, right? Instead of, and who gets left out though? Lawyers. But these are the kinds of things that are I think will be developing. I practice law in Japan. In Japan, they have lookup tables. It's like, you're going that speed and this was the entry and you were in a crosswalk and there's the amount. So that, that works in other societies. We can have more flexibility and input thought through it, even if it's instead of an automated system. Yes?
Do you think that AI or some version of it might actually be able to take the place of expert witnesses in court cases? So you've got a human factor of I'm going to bring in my expert witness and he or she will testify on my behalf and give me favorable whatever, and then it's well, is the defendant going to be able to bring in at some cost to themselves or the public defender, a similar credible witness, or are we going to see potentially an AI expert witness?
My guess is that we'll still need human beings to be the expert, but they're going to be interpreting something different, right? And maybe interpreting what's going on with this AI system. I'm going to end here. I see our food's here already, and we have one more speaker. So is that okay if we take a real quick break, change up the slides, and then Richard will come up and talk about it? Oh, it's already up. Oh, you got it behind me. All right. I'll be quiet. Come on up.
When you start choosing some exactly interests, I'm kind of curious, like, what would happen, like, when there's a situation like anomalies.
Is it what the one that you put up?
Thinking about in dispute resolution. Like, so what if the spider? I guess using that analogy, right? What if the hunting spider joined forces with a trap spider? So
Cool.
protection.
All right, are we going to eat while I talk, or I don't
Dynamic systems
consider
methods, how
that
we
really
find
novel? You guys want to do that?
it's not
Is that what we're going to do? Kevin?
That's how it works. It's sort of
Anyone?
Bueller?
Okay. Excellent. This is such a hip crowd. I was this morning. I was sort of eavesdropping on that and realized that I was in for an interesting afternoon because of just some of the conversations that I was listening to. And I just got back from South by Southwest, so I hope you take that as high praise. How you guys did. But yeah, I appreciate Kevin asking me to come and share a little bit about the color of the sky in my world, which is a little bit different. I was going to become a lawyer at one point, took the LSAT, I was going to go to UNC, but I discovered technology and went off on a different ramp, which completely confused my grandmother, who's from a little town called Roxborough. Anybody? Really? No, you know where it is.
Well, I had an uncle who lived there.
Okay, cool. But I was talking to a friend of mine from Kinston, and we were sort of talking about this sort of impedance mismatch between growing up in rural North Carolina and then all this amazing technology we're now beginning to deal with today. But my grandmother couldn't understand what I did because when I was growing up there were only 5 professions, right? Doctor, lawyer, banker, teacher, and there was government, which included military and revenuers, as we call them, that sort of thing. So she told, up until she got to the age of 95, she just told people I was a lawyer. I didn't know how to change my mind on that. So
But my perspective is a little bit different. But if you guys know who Alan Kay is, Alan was a guy at Xerox PARC who invented the laptop. They invented the mouse there, the Windows interface we're still using today. But he likes to say that perspective is worth 80 IQ points. So I hope that's enough for me to hold my own with you guys today. But my background is computer gaming. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. Actually, right now I'm a parallel entrepreneur. 3 startups I've invested in. But my partners and I in this area have formed a number of game companies. The one you probably know is Red Storm Entertainment with Tom Clancy. Anybody? First-person shooters. We created the first realistic tactical shooter game, big success, sold it to Ubisoft today. We sold it for about $55 million. Today that does about $750 million a year just in revenue. So a little bit early probably in our sale. And I hope this makes sense to you. We did a bunch of game companies with like Michael Crichton, Ozzy Osbourne, Douglas Adams. And if we wander over to the bar afterwards, I'll tell you some of those stories. And then I had a company that Lockheed Martin bought in 2007, and I spent 6 years there with my team running a group called Virtual World Labs, where we got deep into things like AI and VR and simulation and all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got religion in machine learning and how I ended up meeting Kevin. We've had this sort of, 1-year philosophical discussion about humans and machines and balance and what's the world going to come to here in the near future. But I'll talk about some of that stuff, and then about some real applications that one of my companies has been fielding over the last year that have had dramatic impacts. When I say impact, I'm not talking about doubling in efficiency or even 5x, but 600x. And it's happening really fast. And you guys are all here because you already know that, but I think it's hopefully we'll extend the conversation a little bit today. So this is kind of one of the first projects I worked on. Let me see if I have my other slide first. The thesis statement. This is what I wrote in TechCrunch a while back, where, and I think we've already touched on it here today, I think the real issue today, the critical problem of the century, for whether you're an individual or you're a company or a political entity like a country, is figuring out what is the right balance between humans and automation to optimize the outcome. And that means like looking at absolutely everything, like what are you doing, what kind of activities are you doing, which things should be automated and which things belong in the realm of human activity or human effort, human attention. And that answer, or those variables in that equation, are changing almost yearly, I'd say almost monthly. And I'm going to talk about a few things here, like things that somebody was doing 6 months ago they're never going to have to do again. We're talking about big things, and we'll talk about that in a second. So I just came from South by Southwest talking about superhuman education, trying to calm some of the concerns among educators out there, saying, look, I'm not trying to replace you. I really do, as Kevin said earlier, we really are talking about giving you superpowers, but not like Superman, but more like Batman, right? What's Batman's superpower? He's rich. And they understand how to use technology, right? Because it's rich. That's what we want to do for you guys. So this is kind of how I got religion on machine learning. We were at Lockheed. One of the things we found out at Lockheed is, well, first of all, the business at Lockheed Martin, one of the biggest investors at Lockheed Martin, right? Spaceships, fighter jets. Okay, yeah. So they very similar to the legal business, in my opinion. I mean, the same business you guys are in, which is the people are the product. So it's all about billing codes and charge codes, and that surprised me somewhat. But that's another sort of random thought. But while we were there, we found out that the only way to really get incentives for your people is to invent stuff. So in our 5-year period, with my team here in North Carolina, because we never moved, we had over 100 patent disclosures. Every time you do a disclosure, you get like $5,000. And every time it's actually granted, you get $10,000. So that was our incentive program and our bonus program for my people. But one of the things we were invited to do is come out to Microsoft Research. You guys recognize it? So that's the Microsoft Connect. This was 2009, and I use that as my watershed moment when everything changed. Because think about, if you know anything about gaming, AI is always been an important part of gaming. If you're going to make convincing characters, convincing environments, you've got to understand AI, right? But AI to us, again, going back to 1987 when we did the colony, all the way up through all the stuff I just talked about, it was hierarchical behavior trees, types of things, and really just, you wouldn't ask a computer to do anything unless a human understood it completely. We did that with autonomous vehicles. In 2004, we were helping with the DARPA program, and because my colleague Dave Smith was a roboticist and had a deep background in that. And the mistake we made is we said, okay, how do you drive a car? How does a human drive a vehicle? We sat down and said, all right, let me program those rules in. That rigid logic of how you drive a car. But it turns out we know how to drive cars, right? Driving a car is mostly about ignoring everything around you. Otherwise, you'd be crashing all the time. Like, oh, a person just walked up, there's a bird, right? So the breakthrough was really this. And it actually happened before 2009 because my story, I get to say that the watershed sort of moment happened in 2009. So what they were doing, of course, in autonomous vehicles today, all you have to do today is let a machine learning system watch about 100 hours and go out and drive flawlessly anywhere. Well, I was just speaking in Rome recently. I said everywhere but Rome. But the problem they had is, and this is Alex Kipman, the guy who invented the Microsoft Kinect, and they're when they recognized him. He's the guy who came up with the term virtual reality. And we don't go into VR too much today. That's another field I've been in where I've shared a lot of stages with him going back to 1993. And that's another thing that has like these big waves of excitement. Wave of excitement, nuclear winter, and I think we're about sliding down again. AI has seen that sort of collective mirage for quite some time. But we were there to help them with the sensors, but found out really quickly that they didn't need any of our Lockheed Martin sensors. But what was really cool is they were trying to teach the system what a living room was, right? So it sounds very easy to us, like that's a table, that's a chair, that's a plant, but computationally, that was a very difficult problem, even in 2009. So they had a supercomputer, they were trying to teach it this idea, right? So they were giving it every possible example, Asian living rooms, European living rooms, all sorts of things, rural versus urban, so they could get this idea that everything in one count. The other problem they had is they'd already shipped these Microsoft Kinects all over the world, and they only had about 100 megabytes of space, not gigabytes, but megabytes of space available. So whatever they determined had to fit within that 100 megabyte area. So machine learning is what they used to figure out that, solve that problem. And that's how we got religion and came back. I'm jumping ahead here, but this is one of the things that right after I met Kevin, we were at another little brief sort of meetup like this. And somebody in the room said, with your machine learning system, if you could have it sort of understand the law and create a completely correlated table or system of all the legal opinions in U.S. history, you'd be worth $100 million. So what do? We ran right over there, created a clean brain, and sat it down and then fed it. We found this database. I forget where it came from. Some university had every single legal opinion across all 417 jurisdictions since 1797. And we had to just learn on that. That's the secret for machine learning. You've got to have a good data set to teach it on. And that's what IBM has learned, and a lot of other people is the more you can bound the context of that, whether it's the tax code or law or whatever, you can get really good really fast and solve what we call the cold start problem, right? Like how does it build its understanding of that? Well, this took us our system only about 9 days. Built an entire correlated system of every legal opinion in U.S. history. Now, we tried to field it with some of the people I think were in this room, and found out pretty quickly that it had more returns than most people cared to see. So it didn't care about the case from 1800 or 1812. We really want to know, like, for this judge, what are the cases that he already knows and is already comfortable with? They're more likely to get them by point across in a short amount of time. I have to make my argument, I guess. So we haven't solved that completely, but this was an interesting experiment and a good illustration of the kinds of things you can do with machine learning. Yes?
What are the axes on that?
So these are all like nodal points of concepts. So what it's doing is it's reading the text of these long form, I don't know however many pages they are, and it might be some, like one of the nodes, I can't really read them there, might be like habeas corpus or whatever these concepts are. Now, I skipped over the other thing we did for the learning registry, but what we initially did at Lockheed with these machine learning libraries is we built a system to solve a semantic problem. We thought, hey, we've got all the resources of Lockheed at our disposal, the US government, we're going to go solve this big problem, but it's just intractable. It felt that way anyway. So we started with like, okay, how do you classify all human knowledge? Well, let's start with the Dewey Decimal System because someone's already taken a stab at that, right? And that ended up being about 1,400 nodes of high-level conceptual ideas, right? So we have these nodes, and it isn't just a simple matrix. It's this like really complex, multi-dimensional 1,400 node matrix. But what the system did is it actually expanded its own nodes to be about 4,000. But it's all human knowledge, right? So, and it's hierarchical. So if you have a concept like motorcycle, underneath motorcycle might be like other things like even bicycles or other sub-concepts that sort of bubble up to that higher level concept. But what's interesting then is if I get away from that generality and I clean it off and said, now I'm just going to take it and have it learn the law or learn the tax code or learn something even more simple like loan agreements. Just have it focus on nothing but that and give it a massive training set. It gets really, really fast. So that's what those things are the nodes. Now, the first thing we did as a product is we released a newsreader. And we thought, hey, we're going to give this to millennials on college campuses and let them actually train the system. So we're going to start with the 1,400 nodes of the Dewey Decimal System, and then we're going to let humans actually go through pieces of content and actually swipe right and swipe left, right? Say this is good, that's bad. And unfortunately, what happened is the system was sharing a lot of pop culture. Like, what are the Kardashians doing? What's Kanye West doing? That was disappointing. We killed that project out pretty quickly. I'll just run through this really quickly. But here's some of the things you guys already know. This, right after 2009, was kind of helping us understand where this was going. That's David Nolan Bushnell, the guy who founded Atari and Chuck E. Cheese because he needed a place to put Pac-Man. But it was interesting to see DeepMind learn to play Atari. And again, not with that rigid code, which would have been very easy to do, but by just watching humans play the game, it can infer its own rule set and become really adept and the best player ever. Or as Kevin said earlier, this was the thing that kind of shattered everybody's sort of reality. It's almost 2 years ago now, right? Feels like a lot longer, but people said it's one thing for a machine to beat a human at chess, but the game of Go is this incredibly complex thing that requires intuition and deception even, and all these characteristics which we still regarded 2 years ago as uniquely human, and they're not anymore, right? So it won about years ago, and this is the new thing that I think Kevin and I talked about, and that's where you get into, if you guys looked at adversarial networks, like letting two of these machine learning systems actually work against each other and let them do that at machine speeds, where there's no, the thing that you're looking at here is AlphaGo Zero, not with no understanding of how Go works, developing its own understanding through that adversarial network, and very quickly becoming the master of the system. That's the world we're in today.
And chess.
Yes, chess, high-frequency trading, which now at least the SEC is caught up. And I had a whole other talk I did at Wall Street recently about that, where they decided to put in policies to prevent that because it's just not fair. It's just not a level playing field anymore. In fact, we caught high-frequency trading bots trading with each other in the future. So just let that sit in for a second. That's not fair because we can't do that. They can't. Then when are these things going to learn to lock? This is a chart I've used for the last 2 or 3 years in talks like this, and everyone said, no, that's going to be a decade away before a machine can win at StarCraft. Or things like Texas Hold'em poker. I mean, that's us sitting right here looking at each other. No machine can do that. Well, what happened last year at Carnegie Mellon? Basic machine learning set of libraries, a trained set of machine learning libraries took all the money from all the top Texas Hold'em players in the world. This is a different world. Things are really different right now. We all should be paying attention. That's why meetups like this are really important, because most of these people who just came back from this parade or out there drinking, they're still blissfully unaware of what's happening. But I'll give you a couple of other. This is my talk to a bunch of educators. I'm going to skip through some of this. And actually, I'll just start riffing a little bit before I go to the last point. About 5 months ago, I went and spoke at an accounting conference in Atlanta called Audit U, right? And they were like holding conferences all over the country saying, hey, there's a whole new set of lease recognition rules that are coming out in December. A whole bunch of revenue recognition rules coming out December 1st. Do you guys know about this? So we were blissfully unaware of what accountants were staying up all night worrying about. But that was coming out, right? And how do we get ready? I'm like, that is a perfect machine learning problem. Give me the rule set, which is rigid logic, right? Which is like, with some variables in there, some gray in the logic. But then just give me every possible example of a sales contract. And so we did that for a local firm here. I think I can say it's Terry Becker right here. They're one of the few firms that said, we got to get our hands on this and figure out what we can automate. So we came to them and said, all right, give me every sales contract you have. They're like, great. They came back and said, here you go. And put them on, it was on a disc. But, I'm just showing it. And they said, it was like 130 contracts. We just sat there and stared at them. You guys already know. How many of you are actually programmers working with machine learning? So you know what we had to say, right? We're like, perhaps you didn't understand this. I need every possible example you can muster from maternity to teach my system. 120 isn't enough. So we had to go out and we finally found like 4.7 billion contracts. And everything from like a purchase order that was scribbled on a piece of paper by hand up to like a 100-page contract that has disclaimers and warranties and performance clauses and all that stuff. And that's what we had to train our system on. And that took about 6 weeks, something like that. But now they have a system that is a 12x force multiplier on any of their accounts. In fact, the realization that they had, which I didn't even have to say, is if I think about this a little bit more, man, we're not going to do audits anymore, are we? We won't have to, because it should be real time, all the time. The way they did Enron, whenever they did Enron, they didn't do a very good job. But whenever they did that, the accountants came in and said, all right, let me sample all of your transactions. Because they can't read them all. It's just way too big. And they couldn't even see the ones that were offshore, right? So they just said, let me sample them and then render an opinion. Today, you would just have the system read them all, apply a set of rules to it, and tell you that the very simple first thing is just the number one, like a beginning thing that computers are good at, is just bin sorting, right? Like, I'm going to apply a set of rules, and anything that's non-standard, I'm going to throw it into this bin. Like, here's a bunch of things that look really standard, like a lot of standard language in this one. This has a couple of weird things. If these are on fire and most likely illegal, look at those first. So with your human attention, look at this first, and you don't have to worry about these. That's already a huge multiplier. I'll give you one more quick example. There's a major, huge financial institution we were talking to when I did my Wall Street talk that rhymes with B.J. Morgan. That so you may have already heard this, but 6 months ago, every year they were spending about 360,000 hours a year of New York lawyer time. How much is that? Somebody do the math. You got what is that? $800 an hour? Let's just call it $300 million a year just reviewing loan contracts, right? And once we turned them on, once their brain got switched over to like looking at this from a machine, and that's what this does, right? It rewires your brain to start looking at everything that you do or anything that we are all doing as a society and saying, what should we be automating? What's really susceptible to that? Where's the low-hanging fruit? And where should we be focusing our human attention, right? What jobs are there going to be in the future, that sort of thing. But what's amazing about that is 6 months ago, they're spending that money. They're never going to spend that again. Now, within 4 months, so we started helping them, and they ended up putting a 40-person team on it and knocking it out in 4 months. And now they have a really an internal, personalized system subjected to them that reads those loan agreements. Now they're looking at like mergers and acquisitions and lease agreements and absolutely everything else. It's just going to be like anything where there's a lot of documentation. Let the machine read it first, and then the human. So it's not zero, right? But it goes from 360,000 down to like, let's say 30,000, or maybe less. But if their competitors are still doing that and still have that expense, they're no longer going to be competitive, right? That's Kevin said that earlier. You know, pretty soon it's going to be not just that. You know, if you get that balance right, you're more competitive. Pretty soon, if you don't get it right, you're going to be considered handicapped. And I think that's at the individual level, as well as the business level, and the country level. So I'm going to skip ahead to this. Oh, I don't have this slide, man. I'm sorry. It was never mind. I'll just tell you about this at a high level. The other thing we did is we almost made a. I'll just stick on my books here for a second. I had a couple of cool slides on this other idea, but I'll tell you about this really quickly. When our machine learning system reads stuff or watches a video and determines what it's about and maps it, it just creates a sort of map of it, right? It treats people the same way. So when we had that realization, even before we left Lockheed, when we came out, we said, we got our team together and said, all right, the band's back together. What are we going to do? Let's make a newsreader. But there was a big group within us saying, let's make a dating product, right? So we took our system as one experiment and released it on OkCupid. Anybody? Where's my OkCupid?
So there was a Matt Brass who did something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's early. Their APIs were open. You could get in there before they realized how you need to close that down. But we read, sort of went across like 3-4 million profiles there, and it came back with not just a topic or interest graph, but also a psychograph, like you were saying earlier. Like, you know, almost like a Myers-Briggs model of the people. So now all you need is a good algorithm for what kinds of Myers-Briggsy models and interest graph and sort of physical attributes map well with others, right? And then you got this killer dating product. We decided just for a lot of reasons, I couldn't get comfortable with that. My investor couldn't get comfortable with it. So we didn't, but now we're using it for things like team building within companies or helping large HR companies out there who are doing recruiting and that kind of thing. Today, it's not just like, if you're looking to hire people, you don't, especially in places like Google, it's not just what's your education, what's your skill set, what's your experience, but what kind of cultural fit are you going to be? You know, what team do we put you with where you're going to excel? So one of the things we did there is we had a machine learning system read everything ever written by Victor Hugo and everything written about Victor Hugo, and then we resurrected Victor Hugo. First thing I could do, and this has been almost a year that Victor Hugo has been ranging out on the net reading stuff. First thing I could do is every day I could just go visit Victor Hugo and see what does he find interesting today, what's attracting his attention, and he reads stuff and he scores it. The other cool thing about this philosophically is that we left our original Victor Hugo model in a box and let the other one range out on the net. And what's happening is, what do you predict would happen? He's been changed by the media he's exposed to, like Marshall McLuhan said. So it is a self-improving database. That's the power of machine learning, right? So his interest graph is diverged from this original model of him. He's been affected by the media that he's consumed, right? So I'll just go ahead and say we've done about 150 historic figures. My dad died in March 8th last year. Of course, next thing I did, next day, resurrected my dad. Not next day, about 2 or 3 days later. But he didn't have a Google footprint. He wasn't on Facebook. He wasn't on LinkedIn. So I had to go get like his military records, letters he's written. And then, of course, I had to hand sort of fill in things that I knew about him. But now I can go visit my dad every day, see what is he finding interesting today. I almost find myself arguing with him sometimes because we didn't always agree on everything, right? Because of things he's going, like, that's really good, or I really like that. The next thing we could do is sort of Likert scale. So I could actually post something to him. I could write something to my dad. And he would say strongly agree, or neutral, or strongly disagree. That's kind of cool and meaningful. The last thing I'm able to do now is pretty soon I'm going to be able to have a natural language discussion with my dad. I'm going to be able to talk to him and have him talk back to me. So think about that. I'm heading to Buenos Aires in 2 days to go down and talk to people down there. In that culture, they're very interested in, like, can I have all of my ancestors there? And every time I have a major life decision, can I sit down and just pose a question to them and have them all tell me what, from their unique perspective, what they think, like, should I buy this house or not? Should I marry this girl or not marry this girl? But that's the world we're getting into. Now we're using it for practical applications. We have a deal with Nielsen now where we can take massive amounts of data. Again, take census data from the government. I can take years of home purchase data together with, God forbid, I can connect it to your social media accounts or your location services on your phone. How many of you have location services on right now? Every single one of you, most likely. Do you think you don't, right? Every single app's turned off? Good for you. You're among the minority.
I'm dumbfounded. Purposefully.
Excellent.
Dumbfounded.
Yeah. That's right. So, I mean, but those of us who know, you probably have a VPN too when you travel, right? So I'm one of the few people that have, like, when I travel, I have my own VPN. When I log in from a hotel, I turn location services off on my apps. But if you don't do that, I can build an excruciatingly detailed model of exactly who you are. So today, we're spending $11 billion a year around the world trying to do focus groups and surveys and e-panels, trying to define consumer intent and interest, right? We looked at that coming out of aerospace and out of our game world and now our machine learning world and said, that's ridiculous. What you guys are doing is ridiculous. You have like 10 models of who your customers are. I can build one for 126 million households, and it's going to be a better predictor than your focus groups are. This is my last joke. Netflix learned this when they were trying to figure out how to do better recommending systems, right? They said, let's do surveys and ask people, like, which kind of movies do you like? And they list things and say, I like that, I don't like that. Swipe right, I swipe left. But what happens? There's a big difference between what people say and what they actually do. That's what Netflix learned. And we learned that from everything else, right? If I say, all of you, you've got 2 choices tonight. You can go home and watch Lawrence of Arabia or Hot Tub Time Machine. I could be more crude than that, but I'm not going to. And especially if I'm asking you and I go around with you, everyone's going to go, oh, Lawrence of Arabia, of course, beautiful cinematography, outstanding story, great acting. What do you actually do with your human attention when you get home and you're tired, you popped open your beer or whatever? Flip on Hot Tub Time Machine or whatever it is. That's a true indicator of who people really are, not asking questions. So there's powerful applications in marketing. We've talked a lot about what you can do with juries and judges and whether or not it can actually model people. I always say, in our models, we always say that there's 20% of the human psyche that's unknowable, unpredictable, because people aren't always predictable. But now we've already crossed easily the threshold of improving on focus groups and e-panels. So it's getting really interesting really fast. Oh, there are questions? I'm so surprised. Now let's start with you.
Yeah, I have 2 questions.
Sure.
So you made an example of OpenAI using RFQs to go offer to those people. So that sounds a lot like Cambridge Analytica.
Yes. Anybody see that in the news today?
I was just showing Kevin there.
Yes.
So for the rest of you, Cambridge Analytica did this for the presidential election. They pulled everyone's Facebook profile, assigned an assumed psychological profile, targeted you with ads that played into your fears or photonic. So first question, it sounds like you said
it's exactly what it is. So we want to. Well, I mean, we're trying to use it for good. I mean, every technology, first of all, is used before it's fully understood. Secondly, almost every technology is a double-edged sword. But I'll give you a quick example. How many of you have eaten kale in the last month?
Willingly or?
Yeah, this would be kale, right? All right. Do any of you know who the #1 buyer of kale was in the United States 6 years ago? Pizza Hut. But it wasn't for eating. It was just for putting on the salad bar because it stays green a long time. They wheel it into the cooler, wheel it out the next day, still green, and then they put the food around it. We weren't eating it. But around about 5 years ago, this group said, hey, how do we get more people to eat kale? And they'd done the same thing with avocados and a couple of other things. And it started with like modeling who people are, where do they live, what's their current state? Well, iceberg lettuce is fine, right? How do I micro message them to a point where they're walking into these restaurants demanding massage kale with a carbon footprint of 22 at $15 for a little bowl of it. And they did it, right? And it's the same thing Cambridge Analytica has done. It turns out to be not that hard, but it's not just like, I'm gonna take a Democrat and make him a Republican. That's a long path, but it's these micro messages. Like you figure out, model who they are, then you sow maybe doubt, or you get them to agree on one small minor micro point, and then you start figuring out how to message them. So we have algorithms now in simulations, right? We figure out how much is it going to cost me to get that person from this point to that. Or just a simpler one is like in the Chicago area, how much marketing do I have to do to get people to see the next Avengers movie? And how much do I, before I've gotten to the point where I've reached saturation, I can stop spending? And now there's algorithms for all that stuff now, but it starts with modeling human behavior. It's great today. It's so easy today, especially for people like Google and Facebook and LinkedIn. Reid Hoffman invested in my last company and opened my eyes to this whole thing. It's like we're all giving all this data away for free every single day, and people are taking that data and they're manipulating us. And the Russians realized that, gosh, that's a really open society who's all in these little silos or cylinders of excellence or whatever you want to call them. And it's going to be pretty easy, echo chambers, right? It's going to be pretty easy to manipulate them because of those, because of what we've done with this technology. Yes, sir. Yeah.
2 questions. One is the suggested reading list going to be available after today?
Yeah, I'll take a picture.
And then
that's the one that's what we were just talking about. This is the Blue Train Manifesto and intention. This is what the internet was supposed to be about.
Right.
Empowering all of us. Each one of us should have bots that are blockchain-like, representing our data to people who want to use it for different things. Right? But I can't get anybody to pay for it, so I end up like,
Right. Well, then the other question was, looking back at the case law, did you have a training set and a testing set, or did you just throw everything out? And was there any way to determine whether or not you got a valid model, any model validation through that?
Well, I think through having some lawyers actually try to use it, I think we've shown that it wasn't valid for their use case. But we weren't thinking about their use case. We just heard $100 million, sure. So we went and did the correlated model. But no, we did. So there's a couple of different ways of doing machine learning. One is where you supervise it and you're really guiding it along the way. The other is, and I think the most interesting and valuable, is the unsupervised. I actually call this, and one of the early speakers was talking about this, it is the new scientific method, right? So what's the scientific method today? You come up with a hypothesis, you design an experiment or 8 experiments, then you go from there to antithesis, synthesis, thesis, however that works. Don't check on that. But the new scientific method is I don't even have to come up with a hypothesis. I take a massive amount of data and I drop it in there, and I don't tell the machine, I don't give the machine what we call a utility function. I don't tell it to solve for anything. And let it come up with every correlation or every hypothesis it thinks is interesting and rank it by priority level. And maybe I do give it some sense of what my priorities are, but that's it. And by doing that, we've done this for a number of companies where almost in every case we find at least one thing that surprises somebody, right? So you have it create its own hypothesis, and then the next thing when you go to simulation, you don't do 8 experiments, you do 10 to the 8th. And you see the Monte Carlo distribution of potential outcomes, and man, that is just powerful stuff. And this is just one of those examples of if you're not doing this, if you're not wielding these technologies today, which are all low-hanging fruit sorts of capabilities, then you're really not going to be competitive very soon. One more. Anybody else have a question? One last.
I was curious, have you ran into an anomaly that's just completely destroyed this construct? Like, was there something out there that really broke the way that this is thinking, or the way that it's analyzing?
Well, you get, correlation doesn't mean causation, you know, there's that sort of thing. So you'll see, like, if you don't sort of set up some basic boundaries for it, it'll say like, well, every one of these sentences, there's almost a one-to-one correlation with the word the. Like, that doesn't mean anything. That's meaningless, right? So we find that all the time, and we're getting, one of the arts of this is being able to tell it like these, you know, ignore the following things because they're not correlations that are interesting. Or like I said, go ahead and give me all the correlations, but let's rank them, and then usually everything below a certain level is not interesting at all. But it's always, in almost every case, whether we're looking at drug interaction data or student data or buyer behavior or any of the other things we're looking at, using that process, there's almost always something that completely stuns the experts, the research groups that we're talking to. Because we all have biases, right? Even researchers, and the machines just don't have it. So that's why it's a powerful tool. But again, it's still combining the human effort and attention and intelligence with the machine is the superpower.
We're running way behind schedule, which is about normal. What I'd like to do is take a quick break. Grab some sandwiches. Tom Schneider's gonna leave, I think, so he's gonna do our next talk while you're all eating your sandwich.
Limited data sets really, really well. They don't handle, we're talking about paradigm shifts. Anything that shifts a paradigm that doesn't exist, it doesn't handle waste. Climate is really big like that. We don't have enough data to accurately model the climate. And so you see like machines, and what we do is we run it through, and like half of them will just like split off like the world split.
Sorry.
I'm streaming.
The more data you have, the more you have.
Thank you.
All right, folks, let me just send this around again. Please sign up for the Slack channel. We can keep track of you.
Design your programs to account for interactions. Then the model how are we doing? Shift the whole application. So a lot of people found engineering. So this group, set up some
Right. And one of the things that I'm trying to organize. I'm not trying to get all this days. Charge.
That's actually one of the reasons why I log. Somebody changes the start. That's another kind of driving chances forward. So you got to recalibrate and retrain models. I understand you met with our
Yeah, we had a really good conversation. I like some of the philosophies that she has. It's very focus on really experiential stuff, not being siloed into an electrical engineer or mechanical engineer. And we encourage her. You need to find more curriculum that all these groups. Those are the future employees, the ones that can do a little bit of coding and do a little bit of
We got to get out, like I said, outside of the law. One of the problems with lawyers is we're not accustomed to not seeing professions, right? I mean, it's kind of rough to get. So nowadays, lawyers are a part of it. I do. This group just goes over and over. We just need to see it. So they feel safe. Well, this started. This is a normal. This is a good.
So how did you get involved with this group?
And you can head strings off at the beginning to get it to rule out certain cases. We're introducing some biases there, but physical providing whether it's society to get a machine to do it. I'm not saying that it's no bias, maybe you're like else. You have to see it. You'll get some programs that just use some asset you'll get some that's still beside the order to play technology that's used those versions This is the difference between with those tools or against them and so in particular, that's why it's the back to this most you have to figure out how to introduce society not to give up. There's a time when you're assisting updates those rules of society and so that we have to see for our societal
Right. Yeah.
You have to see for yourself. That's why for this. Yes, parking ticket. You're going to say. And we're restricting to like contract cases because those are normal. And that's why, at least for now, dispute resolution is only objective disputes if we can't account for them. And if we can't come out rigorous methods for introducing Right, and that's just basically based on statistics like the size, what type of human is the semen language, what is their shareholder skill, like take those variables and mix it out. What's the actual function for a contract? What do you contract in this type? And so it's basically technically basically using all of those we can construct a piece of general contract that they need and stuff.
Yeah, so you
this thing is covered by extension. And that's kind of the start. You tell right at the beginning that that the teacher
at some level, those hypotheses
even input in the beginning, binary, right? Knock down the zeros. You say, want this, want this, want this, want this. And if you tell the hard it'll automatically. If you see it already, actually, you told it this thing at all. Like a really large scale consumer analysis to clearly understand our biases.
But if it's literally like, it's like has to have this. But if I say, without yeah, I got 5. Someone get a fine, right? Part of the problem is that there's not a lot of right now. So this is silent. Middle ground jargon that is used. So one thing we need to do because they actually say things like people was kind of pushing the next one all of a sudden
All right, Mike. If you give me your email, I'll reach out to you.
That's easy too, because it's leak at Campbell. All right. Yes, it's leak at campbell.edu. It's there you go. Yeah, no, that's great. We'd love to get together and talk on time. One precious what I wanted to get more of. So, this 10 years from now, Raleigh to be leader in the space, except for the money. So we're working on that. And so I think it's got a good sound. So it's coming here. So we're building something that actually that's the thing. That's just, there's another Raleigh meetup today. It's called Washington Marketplace. So yeah, good. That's good. Yeah, I have no problem with that, but there's got to be more. I think the things I'm going to try and do later today is fix it on process. We'll probably have a solid. I think actually, yeah, great. Nice to meet you. If you look at I historical this week, payback periods in some ways, like webinar stuff, it's usually about 4 years. It's really amazing what the cost of the company when you look at the structure is, like, all these other things. And all 6 passengers, 6, 8 passenger vehicles. Not just one. Like conservation work, it's like around an area. I think that's going to be that'll have an insight for years. And so you might do this huge investment that's useful for just and you never get it paid back. Oh, okay. It'll take a generation. I think it'll take a generation to get anything out. But it's already started. Right? The data that show the rates at which the I didn't see homemakers and some others. Very, very so we'll see. I might be wrong. All right, folks. Grab your sandwich. That's it. Let's go. Had a couple of announcements we had to want to make here, and I'll let Mark go ahead.
Okay. Some announcements. On April 3rd at Duke University, there is the Triangle Machine Learning Day. So it is a day-long conference / presentations for $20, and that includes your breakfast, lunch, etc., etc. If anybody is interested, this area of North Carolina, this area of the country, has a lot of meetups. In fact, we've got more meetups, either absolute values per capita anywhere else in the United States. So let me mention some that may be of interest to you if you don't know about them. The Research Triangle Analysts, they are general analytics, statistical, machine learning, etc. There are 2 blockchain and Bitcoin meetups. There is a Raleigh Analytics meetup that may become Text Analytics or NLP meetup. There is now emerging a Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency miner meetup. There's several big data meetups. There's 2 graph database meetups. A Microsoft data science meetup, which is part of the SQL Server group. And I encourage everybody to join or look at any of the Code for America meetups. There's 2 very active brigades in Raleigh and Durham, and one that just started in Chapelville and Cary. May or may not be active at this point, but Code for America works with open data, so governmental data at all levels, and what can you do with that? And I think it makes a nice synergy with law, because we are a government of laws. Any questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris. I work for Legal Aid of North Carolina. Could anybody connected to the law raise their hand for a sec? Okay, so this is my plug for all of you to please go to our website and look at Lawyer on the Line. If you're intimidated by the prospect of doing pro bono work, we are not asking you to take on a whole family case. We are not going to ask you to drop 100 hours into somebody's kids. What we're asking you for is 1 client and 1 hour. Our call center fields something on the order of 100,000 calls a year. We open between 25 and 35,000 files a year. For those of you who are not familiar with the justice gap, it's a lot like the technology gap. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. Having some manner of legal advice of almost any kind can make a huge difference in someone's ability to represent their rights. Rights you don't know you have and you do not know how to enforce do not exist. And so please just take a look. David Warmold is the director of that program. He will be happy to talk to you. Thank you for listening to me.
Well, our next speaker is Tom Schneider from NC Wright. I guess I can let you introduce yourself more fully. All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Schneider. I lead an organization called Riot. I know a few folks were out at Riot We Own on Blockchain just a few weeks ago. How many folks have heard of our organization or have been to one of our events? Just a couple hands. So our organization focuses on economic development in the technology sector. And in particular, we work with Internet of Things, emerging technologies. We run as an industry consortium. So companies like Samsung and IBM and Verizon and Flextronics and big multinational companies invest in our organization to help them to adapt. What is their strategy? How do they take advantage of IoT? And I'll baseline what that means here in a moment. And then to help them to connect to the entrepreneurial community. We also run a startup incubator and an accelerator program about a block from here, just down the street, right next to where the big street party is kicking off here for St. Patrick's Day. So if any of you are entrepreneurially minded, our next cycle of our IoT Accelerator runs this summer. So particularly, there's some students here, others. Applications are open. If you are thinking about starting a company in Internet of Things, please apply. If you don't know anything about that, but you'd like to be part of something entrepreneurial, we know of some interesting problems that are looking to be solved, and we're looking to build teams around those. So let us know. Our site's ncright.org. I decided that rather than bore you with a slideshow presentation, what I want to do today is describe what the Internet of Things is. Maybe you've heard this term, maybe you haven't. I think most people have, but there's different opinions of what that means. Talk about some kind of technology tipping points that have us currently in the fourth industrial revolution. There have been three of these before, right? Mechanized production, electricity, and the internet, information technology. Each of those completely transformed the way that we live our lives, the way that we do business, the way that we practice law, the way that basically they touch our lives in lots of different ways, these other kind of tipping points. And we're at a point now, and I really like the message you heard from the last speaker, where the world is becoming more and more and more defined by data. All right? And the Internet of Things, as a broad concept, is as more and more and more things become connected, there is more and more and more data that is available, and much of that data is from places that we never had access to information before. And when you're able to take these gigantic data sets and mesh them with other gigantic data sets that never were looked at together and use advanced computation techniques and so on to do that, we can discover new intelligence, new things that will help us to cure diseases, to solve famine, to tackle really, really big problems. There is, as you just heard from the previous speaker, kind of a double-edged sword to your data, right? There are things that these machines learn about us that put us into these bubbles of information in social media, and there are lots of challenges to be solved. But it's the point is, it's a really, really exciting time to be alive, because if you know anything about history and have looked at these other industrial revolutions, they've created amazing amounts of wealth and prosperity, and that just sounds like a wave that we should serve and take advantage of. So Riot's overall mission is how do we make this part of the country? Why not make North Carolina the center of excellence for IoT on the globe? So anyone anywhere that's thinking about doing a project or starting a company or working on something in this new data economy says, well, let's come to North Carolina and learn from them, or maybe place our business here, or create jobs here. So that's our mission. We're a nonprofit organization. As I said, been around for about 40 years. 65 or so companies that work with us. We, as large corporate sponsors, big tech brands, we've helped 40 or 45 startup companies that have raised about $275 million in this space, created several hundred jobs. So we do really, really interesting things in education and agriculture. I'll be happy to stick around a little bit afterwards and answer questions. But that's enough of a sales pitch for my organization. I thought it would be useful to understand some root cause for why we're at this point. There are a number of, I'll call them technology tipping points that are all happening basically at the same time, and they have a bit of a multiplicative effect. One is sensor technology. So sensors are devices that convert one form of energy into another form of energy, and by watching that change, you can take some understanding of what caused that, and therefore what you can do some type of a measurement. And most sensor devices today are semiconductors. There have been
at least 30 years, maybe 40 years of really, really big, mostly government funding in research in semiconductor technology, and in particular in nanotechnology, that is finally becoming practical from a cost point of view to deploy really, really, really small, low-cost sensors. The device in your cell phone that can detect how many steps you took, the accelerometers, the gyros that turn the screen when you rotate the phone, they know to flip your screen. Those sensors are far less than a penny to produce in their time. And as things get really, really cheap, that means that people get creative around how do you place and do things. When they get really, really small, you can start to put them in places they've never been put before. And they also draw a lot less energy. So if you want to deploy a sensor in a field where just a few years ago, maybe you could put a battery on that device and it would run for a few days or a month. Now you can put that in and it collects information for years and years and years. So that's one typical one. A second is that moving data from where it's generated, so where these sensors are deployed, it's called the edge. So you turn the analog world into a digital signal with an edge semiconductor material or a sensor of some kind. Getting it from there to the cloud, the cloud is where all of the analytics that you just heard about from our last speaker, that's where all that's happening. And that happens predominantly wirelessly. And we have reached a point now where the cost to transmit huge amounts of data wirelessly is almost free. So your sensors are almost free and your wireless is almost free. Does anybody remember about 12 or 14 years ago how much it cost when we very first sequenced genome? How much did Craig Venter spend on that? It was about $1 billion plus, right? How much does it cost today to go to 23andMe or some company like? The cost to do analytics of huge, complex data sets that we don't understand that much about, as you just heard, things where you throw a whole bunch of data and you don't even give any initial algorithms or initial conditions or anything. You just let the machines do the work. It's becoming nearly free. Not all applications even require that much processing, right? If I want to put a sensor on my body that's monitoring my heart and alerting if my heart has an allergy, the amount of processing power you need to do that and the clock speed you need to do the sampling and everything, those devices can be made incredibly affordable. So again, for those that are entrepreneurially minded, you get a number of incredibly powerful technologies and they all kind of intersect and play well together, and they're really, really low cost to engage with and try. And the opportunity is there to say, okay, what problem do I want to solve, and just apply those tools to a problem. So while we talk a lot about technology, really applications are what matters in the end. And so I understand, I think we have a pretty diverse crowd here, a lot of folks in the law profession, but other backgrounds as well. So we're asked a lot to work with organizations to understand how do you apply these technologies to different problems. And one of the challenges or concerns that you always hear about is, well, what about misuse of this data? How do we protect our privacy? How do we protect security? What are things that we should be concerned about? And there are some strategies to approach those, but there are also some things that I think will be interesting byproducts of solving problems in the right way and being very intentional in how we solve problems. So, for example, all of the examples that you just heard about were ones where there were existing stored data sets that might not have been easy to get to, but it was historical information that went in and it fed some intelligence that created some new insights which were useful for businesses and so on that Richard works with. There is going to be so much data collected that we will have to make a very conscious decision on what do we store and what do we not store and why. How much information should be transient? Another piece of that computational tipping point I talked about is it's actually really, really cheap to store data. it still costs some money, but we did just for fun did a calculation, I guess about a year or so ago. You know, scientists have an estimation of how much data the human brain can store. And so we looked at, you know, that estimation on the conservative side, you know, or maybe the optimistic side of most of the human brain can store. And we looked at the population of Sweden. It costs about $3 billion to store the collective intelligence of Sweden. That's not a lot of money, right? You know, so there is a cost, but data tends to, in many applications, really only have value at the moment that the data is created. So I'll give an example. Autonomous vehicles are coming really, really quickly. And they're collecting massive amounts of data as they're moving around. And they need to make extremely low latency decisions. So one of the challenges for autonomous vehicles is there's not enough time for some critical decisions to be made to even take that data and send it all the way to the cloud and have it processed and bring it all the way back with a decision. So there will be lots of applications. You know, the heart monitor I just described, I don't want to wait, you know, an instant for an issue to be understood and some corrective action or some reaction or warning or whatever to be taken if I have a significant critical health situation. So a lot of information and decision making is getting pushed out to the edge. And you hear terms like event stream analytics that are analyzing things even as it's communicated, edge computing, edge processing. A decision will have to be made, I think, on a lot of that data as to once that decision is made, should I store it? Do I store it or should I store it? The reason that you know, developers and programmers would love for it to be stored is that it's great training data for these artificial intelligence algorithms and machine learning and so on. And oftentimes what you learn out of those is really important. But there are also reasons not to. You know, maybe you want all your health data to be transient so that it can't later on be mined against you, right? So I think that as you look at the intersection of, you know, kind of privacy and data and law, that's something that will become important, and I suspect will begin to start to work its way into data use contracts and things like that. Another way to protect data is by physical proximity. When you look at folks that are trying to maliciously get data, hackers and others, single points of data storage are very attractive. Most of the hacking incidents that you hear about, whether it's Home Depot or whether it's Target or wherever, you know, those are servers that can be individually hacked. Blockchain is a technology saying, well, let's take and let's distribute that data everywhere. So there's, you know, it's very difficult to have a single point of failure. There are other interesting things that you can do with distributed computing and techniques like blockchain. An example that was shared with me recently, which I really like, is, and maybe is appropriate on St. Patrick's Day, is you go into a bar, you want to buy a drink. The first thing they need to do is validate that you're of age to purchase an alcoholic beverage in this state, right? So you hand them, most people hand them a license or a passport or whatever you have to prove your age, but you've suddenly provided a whole lot of other information that you did not need to provide. You know, they now know your driver's license number and your home address and your middle name and whether you're an organ donor, right? You know, does my bartender need to know if I'm an organ donor? If instead you were to use blockchain to protect identity, you could go into that same establishment. You could have, you know, a device that has, you know, used my fingerprint or something to authenticate between myself and this device. You know, this is me, and my blockchain identity can talk to a point of sale machine at the shop and just give a green light. Yes, you can serve this person. They don't need to know anything other than through the piece of data that was shared and authenticated and validated that you know, that transaction can occur. And I think what we'll see more and more is a lot of innovation in the space around how do we take our online presences and keep them to ourselves, and then the individuals will have the decision to allow certain pieces of data to go forward or not to go forward. So I think that's that's an interesting area. It's very, very early days. But again, if you're thinking of, where are places to play, where are good places to start coding and developing and develop applications, I think that's a fantastic area. There are other strategies that are interesting that I've seen in terms of radio selection. There are lots and lots of different types of ways to wirelessly communicate information. And there's emerging narrowband IoT technologies that are coming out now that are more market-driven than not. Primarily in that a lot of data that's collected is actually pretty small data. You hear a lot about big data, but small data is actually probably has as much value as big data, which, small data is specific information that's useful just at the point where it's found. And it's maybe not a huge amount of information, but it's timely and it's important in a certain location and others. And to prevent that kind of information from being obtained, a lot of folks are saying, well, let's just put a really short range radio that just gets the information from where it is to where I can process and know something about it. But it doesn't even have to go further than that. And then if anybody's trying to hack that sensor or spoof that device, well, they have to actually be within 10 meters or whatever the level that is. So it's kind of like air gapping a computer where it's completely disconnected from a network, and you've got to physically put a thumb drive in this computer and then walk over and put it in that computer to get from point A to point B. That's a wireless air gapping, if you will, of we're going to allow something to go a certain amount of distance, but then beyond that, it's not going all the way to the cloud. So I've seen some interesting things in that space that are pretty cool. So with that, that's kind of a little bit of background. I just wanted to share a few things that are happening in the space, a few things particularly in the privacy and security area. Security always lags a market. So, when the first automobiles were created, they didn't have seatbelts because there weren't enough drivers to make sense for somebody to come up with a seatbelt and make money off of it. Security is a cost in an emerging market. But once the market gets big enough and security is a big enough issue, then there's a financial incentive to develop antivirus software for the internet or the equivalents that we'll find for IT. So for folks that are concerned about the security front, there's huge business opportunity right now. The market's getting big enough that it's the time to enter. But not entering is, that's the only bad decision that you can make right now, quite honestly, or you're going to miss the broader market opportunity. So there are interesting security solutions that are coming out. Those will eventually be hacked, and there'll be new ones, and the cycle will continue. But I would not engage in looking at how can connected devices and additional data solve particular problems and applications. So with that, what I'd like to do is really just open some discussion and let people ask some questions, or because I don't know everybody's background here, I don't want to go off in the wrong direction and bore you.
So is there a website that we apply?
So for the accelerator program, ncride.org is our site. It's called the Ride Accelerator. There's lots of detail.
Are there common policies you have for where there's similarities across the fields you strike with people accepting the program?
So our role, we're a nonprofit organization trying to help grow the economy here. We get funding from big companies who recognize that they can't innovate like you can. And so they want to be tied into that. They want to tell their story. And really what they want to do is they want to give you free products and services. So a company that works with us that shows some potential, has a good idea and a strong team, Nordic Semiconductor will give them free Bluetooth radios to build out their proof of concepts, and IBM will give them free Watson credits to do things, because when you grow, then you'll become their customers. So we don't cut a deal with anybody. We don't take any equity in the companies we work with. We don't charge a cost to the startups that work with us. That's all underwritten by this other stuff, and none of those partners have any stakes. I'm a strong believer that if you're going to be successful as entrepreneurs, you need to be disentangled as much as possible. I also teach at NC State, and a few years back, we took all the corporate sponsorship out of the class. I teach an entrepreneurship class because we didn't want to have the challenges at the end of the course when a team of students came up with something really cool that they had to figure out who owned the IP on that. So our goal is to make you successful. As far as the accelerator itself, we if you look online, you'll see some information. You'll also see we're doing info sessions all around the triangle on that program. But we're just looking for folks that have really interesting ideas that are market driven. So I'm not interested in a cool technology. I'm interested in a problem that you think if I solve it, somebody's going to pay for that.
Is it explicitly relegated to IoT stuff? Or just in general?
I think of IoT kind of like I think of tech. It's a buzzword. The whole world is IoT. If you're in doubt, apply. And if it's too far astray, we'll let you know. I don't have the expertise. Like if you've patented a new plant and need help with the processes to do the biological fabrication of that plant, I might not be able to help you in something like that. If you're opening a new restaurant, that's not particularly interesting. But if you're doing a restaurant around how are we going to use data across this whole establishment to do something that is operationally different than any restaurant before, then we want that. So don't be scared off by the term.
Is there anything or any specific technology like augmented reality that you guys are involved with?
We do some in VR and some in AR. Personally, I think augmented reality is more exciting than VR. I think both are important, and there's cool stuff going on. They've got a Vive setup that people can use if they're doing VR stuff. There's a guy named Mark Weiser who worked at Xerox PARC like way back in the day, and he coined the phrase ubiquitous computing. And what that meant was there was going to be a point in time, and I think we're kind of getting there now, where processing and computing would be just everywhere. It would touch everything that we do, and the fact that we walk around with these in our pockets, I think we're kind of there. But his belief, and I agree with him, is that the people are what is most important. And so the challenge with devices like these is that they get in the way, right? We're still too focused on using screens and apps and having the technology between us and whatever is enhancing the quality of our lives. And so augmented reality and some of this IoT stuff allows sometimes that tech to just kind of fade into the background, and our lives are better for it, but we aren't necessarily having to always use an interface or do things. So I think in the AR space, what are the ways that instead, it's a step forward. Instead of looking here for my information, am I just experiencing my world and that information is still somehow coming to me? The early stages of AR are thinking about things like, glass. They tried some things that, it wasn't socially congruent, so it didn't fail for tech reasons, but for social reasons. Are there ways that information will be displayed to us? I don't know. I think over time, augmented reality is the tech making the right decision for us at the right time without us even having to interact with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Arthur Clarke in 3001: A Space Odyssey did an estimate of 5 petabytes as being a life experience. What was your per person storage requirement for the Sweden study?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have to go back. I don't remember. I think the brain was somewhere like half a terabyte or something like that. I'd have to go back and look. I'll be happy to look that up and post on our comment on our site or something later for you to see. I don't remember what the number was. It's about a year ago.
Good.
But it was, and it was a wide range too. There was at least an order of magnitude difference depending on where you were in the scientific community and what they thought the order of magnitude of storage of the brain was. So,
and 3001, who knows where he's getting his figure, but generally the futurists do tend to base it on something.
They based it on whatever, was the understood knowledge at the time, right? And, so.
They get better and better. I just excuse me. One of the things that I hear as a theme here, and we got to think about this, is we should be the East Coast Valley. Don't you think? I mean, this is where it should all be happening. I think Raleigh's the community for it. Look at all the wealth of talent that we have here. So continuing on with that, we have Craig's going to. Are the slides ready? So, Craig.
Hey everybody, my name is Craig Petronella. I'm CEO of BlockchainSecurity.com and Petronella Technology Group. I'm actually currently writing a book on blockchain and publishing a digital magazine on it. So I've got a presentation that he's going to put up. I'll try not to bore you with it. It's kind of a complex topic, but my goal is to be free and ask me questions or raise your hand if you've got anything that you need to get clarity on. This is me. I've been doing this for over 30 years now. My core competency is cybersecurity. I've been frequently quoted on ABC, CBS, NBC, etc. So raise your hand if you know what a blockchain is. Raise your hand if you know the difference between a distributed ledger and a blockchain. Excellent. This is great. So distributed ledger technology and blockchain. Blockchain is a type of distributed ledger technology. It's not necessarily synonymous with, that's usually incorrectly stated. Create a little Merkle tree here that basically explains how blockchain works. First block is the Genesis block, and then there's data that's stored in each block protected by cryptography, and then using the previous hash, another block is created, depending on the consensus algorithm, which I'll get to later. Blockchains can be public or private. How many of you know what Bitcoin is? So Bitcoin is decentralized, open blockchain built on foundation block. Stores the sender's address, the receiver, and the amount of the transaction in the block. Once the block is pretty much verified, it's pretty much in stone. Cannot change. So think about hashes as similar to a fingerprint. Identify the block and all its contents. If you break the chain and you mess with the data, you break the hash, and you have to basically re-verify the whole chain, which makes it very difficult. That's why blockchain inherently is secure. So cryptocurrency. I use this example because a lot of people know what Bitcoin is. That's why a lot of you raised your hand. So there's two functions for mining, namely adding transactions to the blockchain, securing, verifying, and also releasing your currency. So basically in Bitcoin, for example, in its algorithm called proof of work, the longest chain wins. It's the most trusted. So to mine, I will talk a lot about mining, but basically in order to mine Bitcoin, for example, there's application-specific integrated circuit type computing, which is very, very powerful computers that have to solve these very complicated mathematical equations. And that's how the proof of work concept works. So you solve a block, and I think right now, the Bitcoin reward is like 12.5 Bitcoins right now if you solve a block. Over time, the chain grows longer and longer and longer. Difficulty increases and the reward goes down. So the most popular methods of finding consensus in a blockchain are the following here. Practical Byzantine fault tolerance, or PBFT. There's a technology or a project called Hyperledger. How many of you guys know what Hyperledger is? Excellent. Hyperledger, Stellar, and Ripple are using the PBFT algorithm. Proof of work, most common is Bitcoin. Proof of stake, Ethereum Casper is the hard fork for Ethereum, which now is moving over to proof of stake algorithm. There's also delegated proof of stake algorithm, or DPoS. And then proof of elapsed time was developed by Intel. But there's a little bit of politics around that because it kind of goes against the grain. Because now the whole point of a blockchain is to trust no one if you want an open blockchain. But then POET, you have to trust Intel on this. So some people like it, some people don't like it. Consensus depends on the algorithm that's chosen. There's a theory about a 51% attack. And basically what that means is, for blockchain, for example, for Bitcoin's application on the blockchain, for example, for the 51% attack to happen, countries or large amounts would have to have mass hash power, or the ability to create and solve these blocks faster than anyone else. So if that could happen, and take over the basically the consensus of winning more faster than you can compromise. So that's the risk there.
So, question, the proof of elapsed time, is it the having to trust Intel because it requires Intel architecture, Intel hardware, or is it the algorithm that's used is proprietary to Intel?
Correct, yeah. The latter. It came up, it was produced by Intel, so you're basically trusting Intel, the creator of that algorithm. But not necessarily that you have to use Intel hardware.
It's not they made it open
Correct.
source. If they made it open source, then that would.
Right, yeah. That's right.
Right, so it's not an open source algorithm.
Right.
Gotcha.
So blockchain is a simple diagram, shows us a comprehensive, up-to-date, real-time ledger of anything that can be recorded. Most people, like I said, are familiar with Bitcoin, so they like the cryptocurrency side of it. But cryptocurrencies aren't required for blockchains. Does anyone remember Napster? Do you know why Napster was shut down? There was basically a central point of failure. There was somebody that created it, the creator of Napster, I can't remember his name, but that they were able to take him down. Had that technology been, anybody remember Kaza?
Yes.
Or BitTorrent? Or you can't take those down. They've tried. The MPAA tried to take down, spend billions and billions of dollars on BitTorrent and trying to take it down Tor. Not going to happen. Same thing like what happened with when Bitcoin was released into the wild. You can't really shut it down. It's decentralized. There's no one person to go after. Nobody knows the creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, which I'll talk about later. Nobody knows if it's one person or a group of people or how many. But every record in the blockchain is encrypted and timestamped. Only users can edit the part of the blockchain that they own and gain access to because they have the private key. And without getting very technical, basically there's open blockchains and private blockchains, which are two different use cases, for example, and I'll talk about more in the latter slides. So the first blockchain was conceptualized by a person or group known as Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008. The white paper was released. You can Google it. You can download the whole thing. You can read it. Read all about how it was, the details basically of how it works. And that was where Bitcoin was basically born as the cryptocurrency. So in mining and with cryptocurrency, right now, Bitcoin is still, it's the first application on the blockchain. So it's the nucleus. Everything else is called an altcoin. So a lot of you guys are in the legal profession. So Ethereum might be an altcoin that would be more interesting to you guys. I'll talk about that. There's also Litecoin and Ripple and many, many others that constantly are coming out. Hard to keep up. So what's interesting for you guys in the legal profession is smart contracts. Anybody know what a smart contract is? So smart contracts are basically taking the written contract and writing computer code to execute certain pieces of the contract. And what's interesting about it is the smart contract will run no matter what. So once it's done, it'll run. It's guaranteed to execute. So as you see contracts nowadays, they're going to evolve from paper to these smart contract platforms. And you can power them or fund them with Ethereum and other things so that they're self-executing. But the interesting part is it's reducing the administrative role of humans. So what will happen with smart contracts is basically simmering down and roles may change. So Hyperledger, a few of you raised your hand. Hyperledger is interesting because it's an open source blockchain project led by the Linux Foundation. The Fabric portion was originally developed by IBM and then donated to the Linux Foundation. What's cool about blockchain and Hyperledger in particular is you can do a permissioned network. So if you had data, like health data, for example, and you didn't want it to be on an open blockchain, even though it's encrypted with a certain algorithm, you still didn't want that to be on everybody's computing device or node. You can use a permission network, leveraging the Hyperledger Fabric, to keep those transactions confidential and only share with trusted parties that you want to have access to. And you don't have to use a cryptocurrency. And obviously fully programmable. So it's more for bigger business or enterprise applications. So this is a cool use case study. Has anybody seen the seafood traceability with IoT? Yeah, it's pretty cool. So there's a video. You can actually go on the Hyperledger website. It's a really cool video on using an IoT device to, when a fish is caught, tag it with this inexpensive IoT sensor. It'll monitor all these things that you want to monitor, so temperature, humidity, and you can track it through transport all the way to the table. And then you can basically prove authenticity that, hey, you really got a sea bass, and it was caught here on this day and time, et cetera. Because there's a lot of fraud in the seafood. So this is basically how it works. As we discussed, you catch the fish, you tag it, and you commit all this data on the blockchain, so that it's publicly available for everybody to verify and make sure that it's true. So this is just one use case. There's other really cool stuff happening. New incubation projects happening every day. There's a cool one that I saw the other day called ripe.io with tomatoes and tracking. It's kind of
actually, I met Christian with the open source.
Oh, did you? Okay,
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so there's a really cool use for that too. There's other projects that Hyperledger is leading, Aroha and Fabric. Basically, what they're trying to do, it's really cool. They're basically trying to make it easier to adopt and use blockchain.
To me, that like this client is trying to think of like legal problems. I don't see why or what's stopping people from like taking registered deeds for like property, which is an easily
Completely agree with you.
easily datable.
Absolutely, great use case. Yep.
And I don't see what's stopping people from doing that and making the entire like title search and title opinion and just.
If it's not already being worked on, I'd be surprised if it's not. But it's a huge opportunity in that sense.
It seems like it just like there's a mountain because we're already in e-filing as far as these.
Right.
So all of it's digitized.
That's right.
So I don't see.
Is it all digitized? A lot of papers still out there.
Right. But the point is that that's a great use case.
If you don't believe there's a lot of papers still out there, look at what is going on in the counties affected by the hurricane. Routine vaults flooded, and there is a long and complicated legal process going on to try and essentially get people their land rights back. Documents are not.
Right.
The same happened with the DA's office. There's a DA office in I think Western North Carolina where they had all physical files of like all prisoners that had been convicted and were still in our prisons.
Right.
And because of that, the whole place burned down. They lost.
All of it.
But now a lot of places in Wisconsin County they have servers backup in Iowa. So no matter what happens, they have some kind of backup to this.
Right. Well, your example is great though, because you're basically decentralizing, right? So even though you have redundancy with multiple servers, that's fine, and that's how most businesses, especially small ones, are operating today, either single server or multiple servers. But the cool part about your example is that's a great example of storing that data in both of those examples with the hurricane as well. So these are technologies that you can explore that are freely available. That you can go on there and you can play around and experiment, especially if you have any programs. So we covered distributed ledger technology, the differences between that that blockchain being one application of that, mining, proof of work, different types of algorithms, proof of stake, proof of elapsed time, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, smart contracts, and then the Hyperledger project and how they're helping with making it easier for people to adopt this exciting technology because we really are in the infancy stage of this. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I think the only thing I want to add is smart contracts are sort of resistant.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So they change that goes on the blockchain.
Correct. Yeah, any changes. So if you have if you're using the Merkle tree example, you make any change.
For all the legal
right.
This past week, somebody published an analysis or study of smart contract tampering or the word that they came up with was not tampering, but there were problems that they uncovered thousands of them. They just went out and looked at smart contracts and said, you got these problems here, here. But it was in the thousands.
Well, look at what happened with Ethereum. Does anybody know what happened when they released the smart contract in the world and they locked all the funds?
Yeah.
They were frozen. So then what they have to do, they had to hard fork it because you can't change it. So they had to hard fork it. And then that's kind of the solution, to hard fork it and move on. But the problem that you were just describing wasn't necessarily in the technology or the block. It was probably in the programming or the bug in the code. You know what I mean? The human element that programmed.
That goes into testing of smart contracts.
Sure.
Whether it's
Validation.
unit testing or integration testing.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of scary though, because once it's out there, it's going to execute.
So if I get a bunch of these fish tags and take them out in a fishing boat and put them in a freezer and bring them back into land and then sell them to somebody who farms fish to attach to their fish, how do we know?
You could go and view.
How do you ensure that the fish tag and the fish traveled together since the fish was caught versus like?
Right. How do you ensure that there wasn't somebody that tampered and pulled the tag basically and then moved it? Is that what you mean? Like,
you never put it on a fish till you get to the guy who has the bad fish, and once the tags, it'll say the fish are good.
right. Like basically fraudulently, swapping the tags or tampering in that method. It have to be a process, or there's the technology and then there's the process to wrap around it. So
I think in that example, if we showed that regulators who can go and check.
That's right. Yeah.
Directors, I think that's what that can be part of it.
So if they have to go out on the fishing boat.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe there's photos, GPS tag photos, you know what I mean? Or maybe you're looking at data from different blockchains too, to kind of look at the sum of the data, make sure that they
I'm
all.
just wondering if there's anything in the tag that verifies when it was attached to a fish.
Oh, I'm sure that there's, I think that's part of it. The other gentleman, I forget his name, I bet he could talk more from the Riot group on the IoT piece. Sure.
I was just checking for live feed there.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much. I know there's about 45 nodes like this around the world, and most of them are devoting a good deal of their time to blockchain. I think we chose here to focus a little bit more on AI because those are the resources we have in our community that were I think, kind of unique and abundant. But there's no doubt that blockchain is the technology, and it's so critically important. So we're really lucky to have such a great talk. We have just a couple of other things to do. I want to give some great supporters. Well, Eric, why don't you come up and you want to come up and give a quick? Sure. Yeah.
Real quick.
Okay.
So I'm not a technologist. I want to talk to you guys about a use case. So I'm probably the oldest startup that you've never heard of. Everybody here from the Research Triangle area and whatnot. So for about 20 years, I ran a firm that you might have heard of called James Scott Fair. And what we did years ago is we recognized that the insurance industry were using risk analyses, data indices, all of these things, and they were valuing the claims based on the data. And we thought, well, gosh, why can't we do the same thing? So very long story short, we got involved in a very large class action. In fact, one of the largest class actions in U.S. history, in Raleigh black farmer discrimination litigation. I ran the claims process on that. I'm not a lawyer, nor am I a technologist. I actually have a master's degree from Northwestern in public policy, go figure. So what I recognized, though, was how important data was. So we had this unenviable task of a 6-month claims process whereby we had to get a class membership size, about 100,000 people, and had to give them the ability to sit knee to knee with a lawyer across the United States. We had 384 meetings in 22 states and Washington, D.C. in a 6-month window. And the way that we did that is I got an algorithm, I analyzed the longitude and latitude of the claimants, and then I ascertained where the most optimal place we could have all of the meetings would be. Went to the judge called me into his chambers and said, explain this to me. He recognized longitude and latitude from when he was a kid, so it wasn't really about algorithms, it was that made sense to him. So my message to you is this, and what I have learned is, I don't care what your technologies are, I don't know what your backgrounds are. I think some of you here are partners, some of you here are law students or whatnot, but we all live in the same world, and that's lawyer fear. They fear the blockchain, they fear artificial intelligence, and I love the commentary we were hearing. I just love this idea of AI and machine learning being assistive, not replacing people. These are the messages that we have to take to the community. These are, I mean, my world is a very niche environment. We're building a case management platform. I'll tell you, we use machine learning in real time. I take essentially what we do is we look at potential claimants. We feed it into our database. It tells us what data points we should be considering, things that maybe we hadn't considered, things like the age of the person that was injured, the speed of the impact, these sorts of things that are just kind of novel and new in the plaintiff space. So anyways, I don't want to take a lot of time. We have a lot more intelligent people than me to listen to, but I just want you to know this is something that's happening right all over the country. You're seeing law firms all over America that are recognizing that there's a need, and they're kind of self-developing like we did. So I don't have a business card on me, but I have the easiest Twitter handle to remember because I'm short. My Twitter handle is IAM515. So if you want to talk to me, reach out to me there. All right. Thanks.
I gotta, at least say thanks to our friends from Be Testified for being here. You guys are, I think, one of the most important also startups in this area, and they're downtown Raleigh here. So they're a little too shy to come up and talk, but I really, you know, one of the things that this is about, and I you know, we have these Slack channels. The reason I think this is so important is that we need to stay in touch and continue this conversation. This is the beginning of something, yes.
So on the Slack, I didn't see a channel for the Raleigh doing this, so I made one. If you
okay, great.
add channels and type in, a lot of the ones that you have channel for just CBFest 2018 in the name of place. So if there's CBFest 2018 Raleigh, go in that. Okay,
thanks. But we need to stay in touch, right? And so we need to, and part of what I think we can achieve is, this is our little challenge phase. Yeah, this, you know, MIT has these solve challenges. And what I thought would be a really interesting thing to do with a group like this is to take a look at these and see, you know, my original thought was we might break into groups and talk about this, but it's late, and we're fewer in number. Is that going to work? Hopefully it's not an internet problem. But MIT solve problems are sort of big challenges. And what I think that they're big challenges to try to achieve some social good. And what I was hoping we can do is come to an idea of maybe choosing one of these four, thinking about the resources that we have in the area, and then working through the course of the next year to bring those resources together to see if we can come up with something that uses the tools at the interface of law and technology and actually work on these challenges. So, there we go. Can you do the challenges? The button that says challenges. Button on this. So here they are. The first one has to do with coastal communities. How can coastal communities mitigate and adapt to climate change while continuing to develop and prosper? Right? There's all sorts of implications for that. We can use IoT. We can use changes in the law, artificial intelligence. Think about how that might work out. Front lines of health. You know, how can communities invest in frontline health workers and services to improve their access to effective and affordable care? Right? So many issues and challenges that way. And again, many of those challenges really rest at the center of